affairs, and if we're going to be successful, they've got to be completely purged.
Yeah. So, I was listening to Kash Patel's great testimony yesterday, basically. It was great confirmation. Kash, I would expect him to be, in the seat here, hopefully by the COB today, by the close of business today, so he can get to work in the FBI. But one of the things that I am convinced of, and I know some of the areas, and that we've already started to do some work on this, but we have a significant, this is kind of what you're getting at here, Alex. We have a significant counterintelligence and espionage program going on inside of the federal government. Some of that is also over in Congress, and clearly it affects the judiciary of our country, but we definitely have it in the executive branch. A counterintelligence, meaning spies that are adversarial in nature, or espionage, meaning people that are conducting subversion and some form of treason inside of our government right now. So, we know that when we say the left or the Democratic Party, this is really a Marxist movement inside the United States of America. It's been going on for a long time.
And General, just interrupting as you're dead on, none of this is your opinion. We know about Crossfire Hurricane, that you and others were illegally targeted, which Obama was running. Now we're learning about a bunch of other ones. This just broke because the head of the Intelligence Committee brought it out. Arctic Frost, the FBI, directly under orders of Obama, day one targeting you, Trump, and everybody else, and ongoing for years. This is criminal bullshit.
Yeah, it is criminal bullshit. It's not just corruption. I want your audience, I want America, I want the world to know that we've caught these people. We know who they are. And so this is not just corrupt actors trying to fill their pockets with money. Money is a part of it. Power is the bigger part. This is a complete ideological shift that these people wanted the United States of America to take. Meaning, go towards this idea of this Marxism. They're linked very closely to the globalists. You've covered this extensively and in depth and expertly for your audience. So this audience knows that. But this movement has not dissipated. All they do, like good little Marxists do, they basically subvert into the within the government, in our case, into the executive branch principally, and they go into kind of a covert level. And they begin to run operations covertly. At a sort of leadership level for them, Obama is still in the mix. People like John Brennan, still in the mix. People like Jim Clapper, those are the names that we know. The 51, right? The 51 that had their clearances suspended. It's actually 58, because there's another 7 on that list whose names never were released, and they're going to have to go after them. But these people are still part of what is going on in Washington, D.C., to continue to subvert the ability for Donald Trump to do the things that he's trying to do. And what I want the American people to do, it goes back to social media. And thank God we have X, as a means to be able to communicate, and we tap into what I call digital soldiers, or what we know as the.
It's a major launch pad to develop force multiplication and HUMAT in the general population, which is now happening.
One of the names that doesn't come up all that often is Mike Hayden. Mike Hayden, he's another general, U.S. Air Force. Mike Hayden, former director of the National Security Agency and former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The intelligence community, which Tulsi Gabbard is going to have, Gabbard is going to have to get in there, and she's going to have to mix it up. But the intelligence community is the fourth branch of government, which is not supposed to be the case. The lead intelligence component within that branch of government is the Central Intelligence Agency. The person that continues to run that organization is John Brennan. I know Ratcliffe is in there now. He's been confirmed. He's starting to mix it up a little bit. But John Brennan is still the sort of, and I've been very public about this, and it comes at risk. But this guy is out there pointing end of the spear, running the operations, and he's subverting this president as I speak right now, and he knows it. So,
by the way, let me just back you up. It's not just you're the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, National Security Advisor. I watched Brennan in 2018 and 19 in meetings on C-SPAN with all the former spy chiefs, and they were addressing him as really the shadow government leader of the resistance. Yeah. I mean, he clearly is the top dog. He's committed so many crimes. I mean, it would take hours. I don't even know about him. doesn't Trump just obviously doesn't Kosh and all the rest of them know we need to go on offense? These people need to be indicted. That's how we'll shut down their networks, is to cut the head off politically.
Yeah. So, and again, back to what I just said about counterintelligence and espionage ongoing inside of our government, inside the executive branch of government, and it's happening from the FBI, it's happening from the CIA, and it's actually happening from within inside of the Department of Defense. And these are very serious accusations. These are very serious things that I'm saying. And this is where there's going to have to be some time and some effort and some real imagination spent going after these networks, because they're not just one person that is in a really critical job, like director of operations or something. These are now networks that have been put in place, and it started under Obama. They've strengthened it underneath Biden. They had to get rid of Trump, right? They really had to get rid of Trump. That's why when you talked about at the beginning, a little over 4 years ago when we first met, and we talked about what we were going to have to do in these past 4 years to work our tails off. I've been to, I think it's close to over 400 towns and cities in this country over the last 4 years, trying to wake people up to get them to understand this is not just Democrats versus Republicans anymore. These are two competing ideologies, and whether or not we're going to continue to have the United States of America, under this beautiful thing we call the Constitution. And we can do that, but we have to recognize that President Trump is one man. He's going to have competing priorities every single day. We just saw this deadly tragedy of the aircraft getting hit by this helicopter. The other night, those kinds of things pop up. It immediately takes the attention away from what you need to, you need to be doing, but it takes time, and it's sad. The tragic, that were sadly killed. But I don't know, more will come out of this, but on that specific tragic incident, I felt immediately that something was not right. And I think that we're going to continue to find out more and more about what's going on with this particular event, because I've been on that helicopter many times. I've been up and down that, the Potomac many times. My office as the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency is directly across from Pattern 33, which is the flight pattern that comes in there. I mean, I've seen those kinds of occurrences.
And that would be, you only have limited time. You can stay longer if you can, but I know you're very busy. If you want to spend time on that and stay longer, I understand we only have about 6-7 minutes left, and there's so much to hit. Bottom line here, what you're saying is not your opinion. They bragged about it. It came out in the news that Obama had stay-behind networks. They're still there. Trump must remove them, or they will continue to engage in all sorts of sabotage.
This is not going to end. This is not going to end. And every time something comes out, so we can put, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi, we can put all these people at the heads of these organizations. But these are large organizations, and the heads of those organizations, they need to take action, not wait for a 100-day plan. We need to start taking action against these civilian and in some cases military, but mainly civilian networks that exist inside of the bureaucracy, and they need to be gutted. They really need to be gutted. Pete Hegseth was correct on his confirmation hearing when he talked about 40 some odd 4-stars. When our military still needs to be raised back up to a higher standard, and at the end of World War II, where we had tens of millions under arms, we only had, I think, 7 4-stars. So there's an imbalance, and Pete knows that. When we talk about the civilian structure, there is an imbalance, and Pete's going to have to take care of that. And a lot of that is not just the imbalance of the force structure, it's the type of people that are in there. It's this cultural Marxism that has infiltrated into our country. And here's where I want to jump in the time that I have left, if you don't mind. China. Because I want to talk about China. China's irregular warfare, and you've talked about this a lot. And I actually had the privilege, whatever you want to call it. I met the two Chinese colonels in the late 90s who wrote the irregular warfare manual. The Chinese are executing that manual. They are in tune, and this has been 25 years of execution by the Chinese here inside of the United States of America. It's destroy our education, continue to really infiltrate into this country, but destroy our education system, destroy our healthcare system, go after the raising of crime on our streets, the cartels that they are working with. So these are all the kinds of things that the Chinese have been doing. And at the same time, the Chinese have been infiltrating into the executive branch of our government, and they have people not only in the institutions of higher education, but they have people inside of the institutions of our government, Congress, the judiciary, and clearly the executive branch. And I'm not talking about Chinese that are on the job, although there are a few examples of that.
We mean certified communist Chinese agents.
Exactly. People that have, sold their soul to the Chinese. Okay? Now let's jump to Panama.
Ni hao.
This is very critical.
Sing dong ling song.
Trump is
$100 bill.
Trump is so right as he is setting the stage to protect America from something that we don't want to imagine, which is a potential world war.
But he knows China has openly geared up, and Xi Jinping last year said, prepare for imminent war. Trump is making the correct moves for Fortress America.
Yeah. If the Chinese do not believe they can accomplish this without firing a shot, which is one of their goals, which is their main goal, or to accomplish the takeover of the United States of America through people like Obama, through people like some of the others that I mentioned, and working with them, then it's to surround us, okay? Now, Secretary of State Rubio is so correct, and I think he said it last night or the day before, in his analysis of what's going on in Panama. So Panama is the most vital waterway in the world for the United States of America. 70% of our trade goes through there. The Chinese
It's also a
dominate
land bridge for the UN NGO invasions of illegals.
It's huge. And one of the things, if you pay very close attention, which I have been doing, to the various consulates and embassies down in the Caribbean, okay? So it's not just Cuba. Cuba's there, and of course Trump put them back on the state sponsor of terrorists, but it's also other Caribbean nations where the Chinese have started to come into and to take over. And there's some very, very serious components of the Chinese military and Chinese intelligence services that have taken over the Caribbean. So you have the Caribbean, you have Mexico, which they control. Mexico is run by a communist leader right now, and there's going to have to be a lot of, sort of coming to Jesus between Trump and that president down there. You've got the Panama Canal, and then you have a whole series of other countries. Colombia, we saw what the Colombian president did, and they backed up a little bit, but they're not done, fighting us.
Now,
And then
Trump's
you have,
not
of course,
just flexing
Venezuela.
our muscles for no reason. We're surrounded.
Exactly. So what? And I've been painting this picture.
We're surrounded.
10 years actually, and it's the growth of the Chinese in the southern hemisphere. So as long as we're distracted, and this is on purpose in many cases, as long as we're distracted with all of the craziness in the Middle East, Central Asia, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan, Eastern Europe, which that war in Eastern Europe, we should not put another penny to that war.
And just as you told Obama, which he actually listened to because you were proven right, pivot to China.
Exactly,
Now we've got to understand pivoting to China means pivoting to our own hemisphere. I know you've got to go, but I want you to finish this. We got a 2-minute break. Can you do 5 more minutes on this and any other advice to Trump, the American people?
I will, yes, sir.
All right, great. FlynnMovie.com. See your incredible documentary. It's amazing. I've watched it twice. FlynnMovie.com. Go to the general's website, support him and the great work he's doing. This guy's one of the hardest working people out there other than Trump, crisscrossing the country, and we owe so much this victory to him. Be sure and go to generalflynn.com, FlynnMovie.com, and be sure to follow him on X at Gen Flynn. We're going to break. We'll be back in 2 minutes with 5 more precious minutes with General Flynn. Then I'm at all the other news, take your calls and more. Please remember, I'm funded by you. We're in emergency hearing in court right now. They're trying to shut us down again. We'll go, well, you keep surviving. This is a death battle. Just like Trump was battle, and keeps going. I need your support. Great T-shirts, great supplements. Huge sale going right now. It's the first new day of the new sweepstakes for the new Ford Super Bronco. Everybody that buys $1 product gets entered 10 times to win that. We'll be announcing next week the winner of the Ford Tremor. So much more. TheAlexJonesStore.com. Everybody that buys any product today gets entered 10x to win. We'll be right back with hour number 2. Stay with us. You don't get this information without supporting journalists and independent media that are delivering. The Rebel delivers it. Tucker Carlson delivers it. Elon Musk has the biggest megaphone. He supported Trump. He got in there. InfoWars needs your support. All right? We are winning. We are dominating. We're reaching over 100 million views a day just on X alone, 450 radio stations. But I'm fighting the Democrat Party law firm, the main one with Hillary and all of them, Aiken Gump, the ones that sued Trump, the ones that sued Giuliani, the ones they spent $326 million in federal filings 2 months ago in the last 7 years trying to shut me down. And I spent the time with the filings, the suits, the attacks, but we're now beating them on every front because I got good lawyers and we're going after them. So that is the cost of us staying on air and fighting. Okay, we would have zero financial issues if we weren't spending 70% of the funds beating them. And if I had even more funds, we'd beat them quicker. So we're not selling bugs. We're selling concentrated known superfoods like Irish sea moss, the strongest out there, incredible effects, the strongest turmeric formula with concentrate, the strongest you're going to get, not just turmeric, but of ginger, black pepper extract. It's
Turmeric and ginger.
Inflammation.
But it is a big claim, and it is far more believable when modified to the more limited claim. Yeah, so I think the meme is going to be viral, right? Like the aha moment meme is going to be like, attention is all you need, and you can have an aha moment, and the aha moment is basically that, you know, if you give something enough rules and you let it sit in a room and you just tell it whether it solves something or not, and you just let it sit there and do that for a long enough time, it may eventually get it right. If we want, we can talk about why their approach, why GRPO I think is necessary to get to their approach, or not, but we don't have to. I know we're at the hour mark where you would normally switch over, Adrian said.
No. You can continue on for as long as you'd like. There's no limitations here.
Okay, so like I posted, there are a few questions that people asked in the chat, and the thread. I'll also go through those here shortly right after this, just so that I'm not ignoring those questions. I know I appreciate everybody asking those, so I will go through those. The last thing I just want to say is that there's a tweet here from Japan. It's worth Jayipan. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. It's worth looking at that for people that are young, interested in engineering, and if you have been feeling demotivated because you feel like the AI space has like left you and there's just so much to catch up and all that kind of stuff, I say this is one of those sparky moments where if you get back in right now, there's a ton of stuff you can really run with, and so this should be a very exciting time. Go get the GitHub repo that he posted, run it, train it, and it will be about $30, and you can have the exact same results. Then challenge yourself to pick something else like tic-tac-toe, Sudoku, any game where you can basically say whether or not it's right, and have the thing reproduce the effect. It will be thrilling. I recommend it. I'll post that out as well.
Sweet. By the way, if I'm not as responsive as normal, that's because I'm cooking a steak right now using a normal non-stick pan, so it's a little bit stressful.
Should we do rapid fire questions from the chat?
Sure, okay, let's do it.
Okay, so first question is, sorry, I gotta bring it back up. I lost the thing. There's not an easy way to go to the Spaces chat. Oh, there we go.
Just
Okay.
a little pill thing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the purple pill.
Yeah, so the first question is, can I explain the difference between GRPO versus PO? Yes, I think that's a great question. I'm going to try and put this out in a tweet as well. Sorry, in an X postorial as well. But I'm gonna practice it a little bit here. The first intuitive thing I want to explain is when you look at a large mathematical equation, it can seem daunting to many people, especially people who didn't like math maybe in school, and then like people just like glaze over it and just move on. A good way to read these equations is just like take it term by term. So if there's like a plus, if there's a multiplication, just look at the ratios and the relative stuff. Don't stress yourself out like figuring out why everything is the way it is. That's the hard part, but like understanding it should be easier if you take it term by term. So if we look at the terms, we don't have to take it term by term. I'll do that in the expositorial. But if you look at different terms that are going to appear, the key difference between PPO and GRPO is this notion of one applies a minimum and the other one does not. And I'll explain what that is. Over time, we learned there was a pivotal paper, TRPO, Trust Region Policy Optimization from Berkeley. Again, Berkeley's looking like an amazing university in this whole process. Running circles around a lot of people. And they also hold LMSIS, so, props to the professors there. Sorry, I distracted myself. The terms. Okay, so the first thing that you have in PPO that is borrowed from TRPO is this notion of we want to have monotonically increasing improvement when we're training, and we don't want to make big movements. Those are the two guiding principles, and then there's a third one, which is we don't want to have too much of a recency bias. The problem with TRPO was the mathematical equation was very hard to do on computers and chips. PPO is basically TRPO with chip focus and optimizing how to do that thing. GRPO can be looked at someone going back to scratch, and I think the CEO of DeepSeek's hedge fund said this, and I think he's valid. They actually intentionally hired people who were not in the field. That's exciting because they looked at the problem again, and they didn't say, let's not try and go back to the very beginning. They actually went and looked at TRPO and they recreated their own policy optimization technique. And what they did is they said, why do we minimize the step size? And that question, they couldn't, I guess, answer it, and they removed that part. Everybody was trying to make TRPO more, to get closer to TRPO as if it was this holy grail. And they went in there and they said, what if we just did something slightly different? And the key thing here is, like, if we picture like you're training a dog how to do a trick, let's say you're trying to teach them how to walk across the street. You can give them a treat as they walk closer and closer to the street. You give them treats, and they get closer and closer. If they go further away, then you don't give them any treats until they come back, and then you give them treats, right? That would be PPO. You're basically saying, if you do what I want you to do, if you're getting closer to where I want you to be, I'll give you a reward. If you're
Regardless, we're not getting you shut down for at least a month, so this is your last chance to get X2.
And that will help you figure out what I actually want you to do, and then in the future I can get you to do that more regularly, right? What GRPO does is it says, instead of just doing that, why don't we say the dog, and in this example what you're doing is you're saying every 2 steps I will see if the dog has gone closer or further, and then I'll give it a reward. And what GRPO is saying is trust the dog is smart and let it run wildly. Like, it can run very far, all over the place, and at the end of whatever it did, if it ends up where you
the
want
function
it to be,
of a Zen teacher is to put his students in all kinds of situations where in the normal course of social relations they would get stuck. By asking nonsensical questions, by making absurd remarks, by all ways of unhinging things. And above all, keeping them stirred up with impossible demands. To hear the sound of one hand. To, without moving, stop a ship sailing out on the water. Or to stop the sound of a train whistle in the distance. Magic. To touch the ceiling without getting up from one's chair. To take the 4 divisions of Tokyo out of your sleeve. To take Mount Fuji out of a pillbox. All these impossible questions are asked. And in the ordinary way of interpreting these questions, we think, well, now, gee, how could we do that? See, that's a very difficult question that's been asked. And you have to think, what would I do to do that? Because we are caught up in a certain way of discourse, which the language game that we play and the social games, the production games and the survival games that we play are good games. But we take them so seriously that we think that that is the only important thing. And this is to unstick us from that notion and realize that it would be just as good a game to drop dead now as to go on living. Is a lightning flash bad because it lives for a second as compared with the sun that goes on for billions of years? You can't make that sort of comparison, because a world of lightning goes also with a world where there's a sun, and vice versa. So long-lived creatures and short-lived creatures go together. That's the meaning of that saying. Flowering branches grow naturally, some short, some long. So this then is a scene in a Zen community where the spontaneous behavior is encouraged within certain limits. And as the student becomes more and more used to it, those limits are expanded until eventually he can be trusted to go out on the street and behave like a true Zen character and get by perfectly well. You know what occasionally happens on the street when two people are walking down the sidewalk straight at each other, and they both decide to move to the right together, and then to the left together, and they somehow get stuck, and they can't pass each other. Zen teachers will pull just exactly that sort of stunt when going down a path and meet one of their students, to see if they can get him in a tangle, and can he escape from it. And you will find in everyday life that there is a very clear distinction between people who always seem to be self-possessed and people who are dithering and nervous and don't quite know how to react in any given situation, always getting embarrassed because they have their life too strongly programmed. You said, this is a common marriage argument. You said you would do such and such a thing at such and such a time. And now you've changed your plans. Not that the change of plans really caused any inconvenience, but just the feeling that when you say you will do something at a certain time, you ought to do it at that time, come hell or high water. Well, that's being very unadaptable. That's being a stone kind of sticky thing. If it, after all, doesn't matter when we do it, and somebody is offended because the time has been changed, that's simply because they are attached to punctuality as a fetish. And this is one of the great problems. This causes many automobile accidents. Men rushing home to be on time for dinner when they stayed late either working or they had to stop for a drink at some bar, or when the girl feels that she has to, if she has a fussy husband and she feels she has to have the dinner ready at exactly a certain moment, she ruins the cooking. You'd rather have a faithful wife and a bad cook. I hope I'm not treading on any toes. So, you see, we spend an awful lot of energy trying to make our lives fit images of what life is or should be, which they could never possibly fit. So, Zen practice is in getting rid of these images. But it's so explosive socially to do that. And it so worries people. They get vertigo, they get dizzy, they don't know which end is up. And this happens, if you've ever been in one of those blab sessions, where they call them tea groups, I think, or something like that, where the people gather together without any clear idea of what this gathering's about. They know it's somehow self-exploration, but just how do you begin on that? And so somebody starts to push his idea, and then somebody else says, well, why are you trying to push your idea on us? And then they all get into an argument about the argument. And the most amazing confusions come about, but sometimes they all see what idiots they're being, and then they learn to live together in a really open and spontaneous way. There was a very interesting dinner party once where a Zen master was present, and there was a geisha girl who served so beautifully and had such style that he suspected she must have some Zen training. And after a while, when she paused to fill his sake cup, he bowed to her and said, "I'd like to give you a present." And she said, "I would be most honored." And he took the iron chopsticks that are used for the hibachi, the charcoal brazier, moving the charcoal around. He picked up a piece of red-hot charcoal and gave it to her. Well, she had very long sleeves on her kimono. She whirled the sleeves around her hands and took the hot charcoal, withdrew to the kitchen, dumped it, and changed her kimono because it was burnt through. Then she came back into the room, and after a suitable interval, she stopped before the Zen master and bowed to him and said, "I would like to give you, sir, a present." And he said, "I would be very much honored." Of course, he was wearing a kimono, something like this. And so she picked up a piece of coal and offered it to him. He immediately produced a cigarette and said, "Thank you, that's just what I needed." Now, you know, in the same way that we have this in our culture, certain people who are comedians, who know how to make jokes and gags in a completely unprepared situation, face them with anything, and they somehow come through. So that is exactly the same thing in a special domain as Zen. Only a master of Zen does this in every life situation. But the important thing is to be able to do this This is the secret. You must remember, you can't make a mistake. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do. Because from childhood up, we have had to conform to a certain social game. And if you're going to conform to this game, you can make mistakes or not make mistakes. And so this thing has gone into us all the time. You must do the right thing. There's certain conduct appropriate here, there's certain conduct appropriate there. And that sticks in us and gives us a double self all our lives long because we never grow up. Do you realize that the whole of life plays a game, which is a childhood game? There are three kinds of people: top people, middle people, and bottom people. And there can't be any middle people unless there are bottom people and top people. There can't be any top people unless there are middle and bottom people. And so it goes. And everybody's trying to be in a top set. Well, if they're going to be there, there's got to be someone in a bottom set. And the people who do the right thing and the people who do the wrong thing. Here in Sausalito, we have this very, very plainly. There are the right people, the nice people who live up on the hill. Then there are the nasty people who live down here on the waterfront, and they grow beards, and they wear blue jeans, and they smoke marijuana. And whereas the other people on the top of the hill drive Cadillacs and have wall-to-wall carpeting and nicely mowed lawns, and their particular kind of poison is alcohol. Now, the people who live on the top of the hill know that they're nice people. But they wouldn't know they were nice people unless they had some nasty people to compare themselves with. Every in-group requires an out-group, whereas the nasty people think they are the real far-out people, whereas those people, those hillbillies, are squares. And they wouldn't be able to feel far out unless there were squares. See? These things simply go together. But when that is not seen, we play the games of getting on top of things all the time. And so we're in a constant state of competition as to, if it's not I'm stronger than you, it's I'm wiser than you, I'm more loving than you, I'm more tolerant than you, I'm more sophisticated than you. It doesn't matter what it is, but this constant competition is going on. In terms of that competition, we can, of course, lose place and in that sense make mistakes. But what a Zen student is a person who is not involved in the status game. That's the real meaning of a monk. He is not keeping up with the Joneses, and to be a master, he must get to the point where he's not trying to be a master. The whole idea of your being better than anybody else simply doesn't make any sense at all. It is totally meaningless. Because you see everybody manifesting the marvel of the universe in the same way as the stars do, and the water and the winds and the animals. And you see them all as being in their right places and not being able really to make mistakes, although they may think they're making mistakes or not making mistakes and playing all these competitive games. But that's their game. Now, I only say, if that game begins to bore you, and it begins to trouble you and give you ulcers and all kinds of things, then you raise the problem of getting out of it. And therefore you start to become interested in things like Zen. That is simply a symptom of your growing in a certain direction, where you are tired of playing a certain kind of game. You are as naturally flowing in another direction as if a tree were putting out a new branch. So because you say, oh, well, we people are interested in higher things, you see, that depends still on the differentiation of rank between the superior and the inferior people. But when you begin to see through that and grow out of that, you don't think anymore of this superior and inferior classification. You don't think we are spiritual people who attend to higher things as distinct from these morons who are only interested in beer and television. The trouble with the human being is, like the trouble with certain animals, like the dinosaur, who evolved to the point where he was so big that he had to have two brains, a higher self in the head and a lower self in the rump. And the difficulty was to get these two brains coordinated. But we have exactly the same trouble. And we are suffering from a kind of jitters that comes from being two-brained. Now, you see, I'm not saying that that jitters is bad. It's a potential step in evolution and an opportunity of growth. But remember, in the process of growth, the oak is not better than the acorn. Because what does it do? It produces acorns. Or you could say, just like I sometimes love to say, that a chicken is one egg's way of becoming others. So an oak is an acorn's way of becoming other acorns. Where is the point of superiority? The first verse of that poem I just quoted, the flowering branches grow naturally, some short, some long. The first verse is, in the landscape of spring, there is nothing superior and nothing inferior. The flowering branches are naturally, some short, some long. So that's the point of view of being an outcast, in the sense of being outside the taking seriously of being involved in the social game, and therefore being threatened by making mistakes, of doing the wrong thing. That is to say, of carrying into adult life one's childhood conditioning, where somebody is constantly yammering at you to play the game. So therefore, the preachers And the teachers take the same attitude towards their adult congregations that parents take to children, and lecture them and tell them what they should do. And judges in courts feel also entitled to give people lectures because they say those criminal types haven't grown up, but neither have the judges. It takes two to make a quarrel. So one can begin to think in a new way, in the polarity thinking, instead of being stuck with the competitive thinking of the good guys and the bad guys, the cops and the robbers, the capitalists and the communists, all these things which are simply childishness. Now, of course, you recognize that the moment I say that, it's like talking in English in order to show that the English language has limitations. And I am talking in a language that seems competitive to show that the competitive game has limitations. As if I were saying to all you cats here, look, I have something to tell you that is, and if you get this, you'll be in a better position than you were before you heard it. But I cannot speak to this group or this society or this language-speaking culture without using the language, the gestures, the customs, etc. that you have. The Zen masters try to get around this by doing things suddenly that people just don't get. Well, what is this? Therefore, that is the reason why, this is the real reason why, Zen cannot be explained. You have to make, as it were, a jump from the valuation game of better people and worse people, in groups and out groups. And you can only make it by seeing that they all are mutually interdependent. So if we take this situation, let's say I would be talking to you and saying, look, I have some very special thing that you've got to take notice of. Therefore, I am the in-group, and I'm the teacher, and you are the out-group. I know perfectly well that I cannot be the teacher unless you come here. And so that my status and my position is totally dependent on you. It isn't something, you see, therefore I have first, and then you get. These things arise mutually. So if you wouldn't come, I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't know what to say even. Because I borrowed your language. So that is the insight that things go together. Then, when you see that and aren't in competition, then you don't make a mistake, because you don't dither. When I first learned the piano and played these wretched scales, the teacher beside me had a pencil in her hand, and she hit my fingers every time I made a wrong note. Consequent was I never learned to read music, because I hesitated too long to play the note on time. Because I was always, is this pencil going to land? See? And that gets built into your psyche. And so people are always, although they're adults and nobody is clubbing them around and screaming at them any longer, they hear the echoes of that screaming mama or that bombinating papa in the back of their heads all their life long. And so they adopt the same attitudes to their own children, and the fast continues. Because there is no, I don't say that you shouldn't lay down the law to children if you want them to play the social game. But if you lay down the law to your children, you must make provision later in life for them to be liberated, to go through a process of curing them from the bad effects of education. But you can't do that unless you too grow up, you see? Unless we grow up. Says I, including myself. So that is the thing. Now, therefore, In the Zen scene, you would think that the master, as we know him and as we read about him, is an extremely authoritarian figure. That's the way he deliberately comes on at the beginning. He puts up a terrific show of being an awful dragon. And this screens out all sorts of people who don't have somehow the nerve to get into the work. But once you are in, a very strange change takes place. The master becomes the brother. He becomes the affectionate helper of all those students, and they love him as they would a brother, rather than respect him as they would a father. And therefore the students and masters, they make jokes about each other. They have a very curious kind of social relationship, which has all the outward trappings of the authoritarian. But everybody knows on the inside that that's a joke. Liberated people have to be very cool. Otherwise, in a society which doesn't believe in equality and cannot possibly practice it, they would be considered extremely subversive. And therefore great Zen masters wear purple and gold and carry scepters and sit in thrones. And all this is carried on to cool it. The outside world knows that they're all right. They have discipline, they have order, they're perfectly fine. Having discussed basic principles of what Zen is about, I'm passing on to the more practical side of it. A Zen monastery is not a monastery in the Christian sense. It's more like a theological seminary, except that it practices more than it teaches. A typical institution consists of a campus. And on the campus there are many buildings. First of all, round the edges you will invariably find independent temples that were founded in times past by noble families, because one of the things that the Buddhists did when they came to the Far East was they exploited ancestor worship. This was very clever of them. This being the great religion of China, the Buddhist priests performed services like requiem masses for the repose of the souls or for good reincarnations for one's ancestors, and they made quite a thing out of that. And so they have memorial services for the departed, and that's one of the principal functions of temples in Japan. People don't go to temple in the same way as Westerners go to church. They make pilgrimages to temples, and say at a great temple like Eiheiji, you will find on a Sunday morning, or practically any morning, a swarm of about 500 people attending the 4 a.m. service of chanting the Buddhist scriptures. But they're kind of in and out of their temples. They have special services, they have memorial services, weddings, funerals, or everything like that. But they don't have a parish kind of church community as we find it in the West. Although when Buddhism, through the Japanese immigrants, exports itself to the United States, they immediately copy the Protestant church institution and sing, "Buddha loves me, this I know, for the sutra tells me so." It's terrible. And all the young men, Nisei, who have never been in Japan, the one thing they can't stand is sutra chanting, because they don't know what it means, and the priests don't know what it means a lot of the time. And but it's beautiful to listen to, and they haven't got an educated Western ear yet to appreciate that kind of Oriental music. Well now, aside from these many temples, each of which is in charge of a priest with his family, and some of them are having a hard time making a go of it these days, so they've become restaurants for very elegant food, or museums, and all sorts of things. Now the guts of a Zen temple is what's called the Sodo. So in Japanese is the Sangha, the order of followers of the Buddha. Do simply means hall. So the Sangha hall, or Sodo, is the center. And this consists of a number of rooms, but the main one, the actual Sodo itself, is a large, long, spacious room with platforms on either side and a wide passage down the center. The platforms are 6 feet wide, and each contains a number of tatami mats, which are measure 6 by 3. And every monk is assigned to a mat. And on a shelf behind the mat against the wall, he has all his possessions, which are very simple. And so the mat is his sleeping place and his meditation place. There is an image of the Bodhisattva Manjusri in the hall, more or less in the center of the passage between the platforms. Manjusri is a bodhisattva, they call him Monju in Japan, who holds in his hand a sword. And this sword is the sword of wisdom, or prajna, which cuts asunder all illusions. That is the dwelling place and the meditation place of the monks. And then they have, of course, kitchens and library, and they have special temples that the monks use for various services. Then aside from that, there are the quarters of the Kansho, who is the abbot or administrative head of the temple, and then the quarters of the Roshi, who is the spiritual teacher. There isn't in the Zen, not in the Rinzai Zen school at any rate, exactly a hierarchy. Every temple is independent. There's no pope, no archbishop. But there is a fraternal relationship between all the temples of the Rinzai sect. The Soto sect have a little bit of a hierarchy, but still, on the whole, the Kansho, or administrative head of the temple, is the big boss. The Roshi is the respected boss, the man everybody's terrified of, at least on the outside at any rate. Now, if you want to get into one of these institutions and study, they make it difficult. It's so different from the welcome attitude you get when you go into a Christian church. Here they repel you. Westerners, of course, are treated with a certain amount of courtesy that is not ordinarily accorded to Japanese. But even then, it's made difficult, because they realize that a Westerner who's taken the trouble to learn Japanese and to get himself over the oceans and to live under unfamiliar conditions is certainly pretty serious about it. And there are a number of Western Zen monks. So funny, there's one at Heiji who comes from San Francisco, and he's tremendously tall. And to see him with all the others is quite amusing. Anyway, the formal approach is that you arrive in your traveling gear at the gate. And the Zen monk's traveling gear is most picturesque. He wears a great mushroom on his head, enormous straw hat, about so wide. And then he has a black robe, rather shorter than a kimono, and he has long white tabi socks underneath, and gaita, which are the wooden sandals with bridges on them to keep you high up a bit. Or he may wear just plain waraji, which are straw sandals. Then he carries on the front his little box in which are his eating bowls, his razor, his toothbrush, and such necessities of life. Well, when he arrives, he's told that the monastery is very poor and they can't afford to take on any more students, and that the teacher is getting old and it might tax his strength and things like that. So he has to sit on the steps, and he puts his traveling box in front of him. He takes off his big hat and he lays his head on the box, his forehead, and waits there all day. But he is invited in for meals to a special little guest house because no traveling monk can be refused hospitality. And he is admitted at night into this special place, but he is expected not to sleep, but to spend all night in meditation. In olden times, this went on for at least a week or 10 days. So you must remember the aspect of a Roshi to this young monk. He's a formidable fellow, usually an older man, who has about him something that is difficult to put your finger on. There's a certain fierceness, coupled with a kind of tremendous directness, a sense of somebody who sees right through you. And so he really poses to this young fellow, "What do you want? Why did you come here?" But he said, "I came to be instructed in Zen." The teacher says, "Well, we don't teach anything here. There isn't anything in Zen to study." Well, the student knows, or thinks he knows, that this not anything which is studied in Zen is the real thing. That's, of course, as a Buddhist, he knows that what isn't anything is the universe, the great void, the shunyata. And so he isn't fazed by that. He says, "Well, nevertheless, you do have people who are working here and meditating under your instruction, and I'd like to join them." Well, maybe, but strictly on probation. And then, of course, all the details are taken. And he pays a ridiculously small fee, in modern Japan at any rate, to be able to stay in the monastery. It's very, very inexpensive. Now the teacher comes back and says, "Now you want to study Zen. Why?" "Well, because I'm oppressed by the rounds of birth and death, in other words, by the vicious circles of life in which I find myself, by suffering, by pain, and so on, and I want to be emancipated." The teacher says, "Who is it that wants to be emancipated?" Well, that's a stopper. There was a good old story about one of these preliminary interviews. The master asks, first of all, very casual questions. "Where's your hometown? What's your name? What did your father do? And where did you go to college? Why is my hand so much like the Buddha's hand?" And suddenly, in midstream of an ordinary conversation, clunk, the student is blocked. And so there is devised the koan, K-O-A-N in Chinese, kunman. And this means, literally, the word koan means a case, in exactly the same sense as we talk about a case in law which functions as a precedent for future cases. Koan should be translated case. The koans are based on stories, mondo, of the conversations between the old masters and their students. But you can make a koan immediately by such a question: "Why is my hand so much like the Buddha's hand?" Or, "Who are you that asked this question?" If the student tries to verbalize on that and say, "Well, I am so-and-so," he asks, "Who knows that you're so-and-so? How do you know that you know? Who knows that you know? Find out." In other words, the basic koan is always, "Who are you? Who is it that wants to escape from birth and death?" And I won't take words for an answer. I want to see you. And all you're showing me at the moment is your mask. So then the student is sent back to the monk's quarters, the Sodo. And the chief of the Sodo is called the Jikijitsu, is then put in charge of him. And he teaches him how to behave, what the rules are, how to eat, and how to meditate. In the Zen sect, they sit on padded cushion about the thickness of the San Francisco telephone directory, which is an admirable substitute. And then, with crossed legs in the lotus posture, with the feet resting on the thighs, like you always see a Buddha, they sit for half-hour periods. That's supposed to be the length of time it takes for a stick of incense to burn. And then, when wooden clappers are knocked together, they all get up and they walk round and round the room, quite fast, at a kind of pace. And this keeps you awake. Then, at a given signal, they go back and meditate again. And constantly there is a monk, one on each side, carries a long, flat stick shaped almost like this fan, in the sense that it's thin at one end and rounded at the other. And if this guy sees a monk who is slouching or sleeping or goofing off in some way, he very respectfully bows before him, and the monk rests his head on his knees, and this fellow takes the stick and hits him vigorously on the shoulders, here, like this. Now, most apologists for Zen say, this is not punishment, it's simply to keep you awake. Don't you believe it? I've investigated this. And it's the same as the sort of British boys' school, only it doesn't have the erotic qualities that the British floggings do. The Zen people are cool about it, but it is a kind of a fierce thing. Anyway, the point of the meditation, the Zazen, is that perhaps at the beginning one does nothing more than count your breathing. So many breaths, counting in tens. Just to allow your thoughts to become still. Zen people do not close their eyes when they meditate, nor do they close their ears. They keep their eyes on the floor in front of them, and they don't try to force away any sounds that are going on, or any smell, or any sensation whatever. Only they don't think about it. And this can become an extraordinarily pleasant occupation. All the little sounds of distant traffic, of birds, of somebody carpentering somewhere and a hammer going, dog barking, or especially rain on the roof. Gorgeous. They don't block that out. But as time goes on, instead of counting breathing, they devote themselves to the koan problem, which the Roshi has assigned. What is the sound of one hand? Who were you before your father and mother conceived you? When Joshu was asked, does a dog have Buddha nature? He replied, no. What is the meaning of no, or mu? And so, as time goes on, every day, the student goes to the teacher for what is called Sanzen. Sanzen means studying Zen. And he has to present a satisfactory answer to the koan. Now, Sanzen is the moment in the monastery when no holds are barred, although there's a very formal approach to it. The monk has to stop outside the master's quarters and make this mokugyo. He does that 3 times. And at a signal from the master, which is ringing a bell in reply, he goes in and sits down in front of the master and bows right down to the floor, and then sits up, and he repeats the koan that he's been given, and he's supposed to answer it. Now the master, if he's not satisfied with the answer, may simply ring his bell, which means interview over, nothing doing. Or if he's still not satisfied, he may try to do something to hint the student as to which way to go, or puzzle him further, some sort of comment. But what happens is this. Do you see what kind of a situation has been set up here? The student is really being asked to be absolutely genuine. So if I said to you, now don't be self-conscious. I want you to be perfectly sincere. And as a matter of fact, I'm a mind reader. And I know whether you're being sincere or not. I can see right down to that last little wiggly guzzle in the back of your mind. And if you think I can, you see, I'm putting you in a double bind. I'm commanding you to be genuine. How can you possibly do that on command? Especially when the person you're confronted with is a father figure, an authority figure. And in Japan, the sensei, the teacher, is even a more authoritative figure than one's father, which is saying a lot. But you are being asked in the presence of this tiger to be completely spontaneous. Or it isn't put in that way, you see, though. I mean, I'm describing this from the standpoint of a psychologist observing what's going on here. No, the thing you've got to do is you've got to hear the sound of one hand. And as your answers become more and more rejected, you get more and more desperate. And there is built up the state that is called the great doubt. The students do everything, you know. They've read all the old Zen stories, and they come in with the pieces of rock and wood, and they try and hit the teacher. They do everything they get, and nothing will do. I remember I had a friend studying in Kyoto, and on the way to the master's quarters, you pass through a lovely garden with a pool, and he saw a bullfrog in the garden. And he grabbed this bullfrog, they're very tame in Japan, nobody eats them, and put it in the sleeve of his kimono. And when he got in to give an answer to his koan, he produced the bullfrog. And the master shook his head and said, too intellectual. Of course, he meant not so much what we mean by intellectual, but too contrived. Too premeditated. You know, you're just copying other people's Zen antics. And that's something you just can't get away with. Well, there does come a critical point of total desperation. And when the student reaches that point, the teacher really starts encouraging him. He says, now, come on. You're getting warm, but you must be ready to die for this. You must, students have even been put under, into the position that if they don't get it in so many days, they're going to commit suicide. And they have to stimulate this intense period, a thing called osession. Don't confuse the word session with the English session. Session means studying or observation of the shin, the heart, the mind, the heart-mind. And at this time, they only sleep 4 hours a night. And they meditate solidly all through the day. They go for the Sanzen interview twice a day, every one of them. And it's a tremendous workout and will last about 5 days, 5 or 6 days. And in that period, the pressure is really on. Everybody is worked into a pitch of this kind of psychic fury that they have to get this thing answered. There's a man in Japan today who has a 5-day Zen system, and he practically guarantees that you will have Satori in his 5 days. I've just got a book about it written by a British. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Well, I had someone I knew of who was over studying Zen on a Fulbright grant, and the grant was winding up, and he still hadn't got the sound of one hand. He said to the master, "Look, a grant's running out and I can't stay here. And I've just got to get this thing." So just the day before he left, he suddenly realized that there was nothing to realize. And that was it. You know, here he had spent his whole life thinking that there's something deficient in me. See, there's something wrong. Something I ought to find out to get this problem of life cleaned up. Well, you know what you do. Rinzai, the old Chinese master, said, Zen teaching is like using an empty fist to deceive a child. Or like trying to stop a child crying by giving it a yellow leaf. See, the child wants gold. And so you give it an autumn leaf and say, "Dear darling, there's some gold. Be all right." So there comes the time, you see, when the student can go in front of the master and not give a damn. Because he's seen the point. There wasn't a problem. He made up the problem himself. He came and projected it on this master who knew how to handle that kind of person by making him much more stupid than he was before. Until he sees the essential stupidity of the human situation where we are playing a game of one-upmanship on other people and on the universe. How to get the better of life. Well, what makes you think you're separate from life so that you can get the better of it? How can you beat the game? What game? Or who will beat it? This illusion of beating the game, of finding the thing out, of catching it by the tail, is therefore dissipated by the technique of the koan. It's called, working on a koan is like a mosquito biting an iron bull. It's the nature of the mosquito to bite. It's the nature of an iron bull to be unbitten. Or they say it's like swallowing a ball of molten lead. You can't swallow it down. You can't cough it up. You can't get rid of this thing. That's the great doubt, you see. But this is an exaggerated form of what everybody is ordinarily trying to do, to beat the game. So at that moment, the student has heard the sound of one hand, or discovered who he was before father and mother conceived him, or what no means. So the teacher says, good. Now, you have found the frontier gate to Zen. You put your foot in at the door, and you're across the threshold. But there's a long way to go. And now you have found this priceless thing out, you must redouble your efforts. So he gives him another koan. Now the student may be able to answer that one instantly, because it's simply a test koan. See, there are 5 classes of koans. The first class is what you call the Hinayana koans, and the other 4 are the Mahayana koans. Hinayana is to reach nirvana. Mahayana is to come back and bring nirvana into the world as a bodhisattva. So once you get the great void, you see, there's nothing to catch on to. You are the universe. It doesn't matter whether you live or die. That's nirvana. All clinging to life, everything like that, you see then that it's hopeless. And you give it up, not because you know you think you ought to give it up, because you know there is no way of catching it. There's nothing to catch hold of. There's no safety in the cosmos. So you just have to give up. Then, the next class of koans are such things as asking for miracles. In that class comes, take the 4 divisions of Tokyo out of your sleeve. Or stop the booming of a distant bell. Blow out a candle in Timbuktu. But as they go on in various ways, they are concerned with all kinds of problems and how Zen understanding deals with those problems, until we get in the end to the study of morality and rules of social and monastic life. That's the last thing. And the Zen way of understanding it. Now, this takes very, very differing periods of time. Some people get through in as little as 10 years, the whole thing. There is a very brilliant Westerner by the name of Walter Novick, who has just about completed the whole thing. And he's a musician and a pianist. And he'll come back to this country as the first accredited Zen master of the West. And he'll set up his little sodo on a farm and wait and see what happens. The basis of all Indian philosophy, particularly the teaching of those books called the Upanishads, which are really the distilled essence of Hindu thought. The basis is called the self. And this word in Sanskrit is Atman, and that means self in the vastest possible sense and the most inclusive sense of the word. It means yourself, and it means also self as such, existence as such, the totality of all being. And of course, this is something that one cannot talk about in the sense of talking about it logically. You can talk about it. A poet can talk about anything, and the Upanishads are very largely poetry. Of course, everything in the world, knives and forks, tables and chairs, trees and stones, are indescribable. Korzybski referred to the physical world as the unspeakable world, which was really rather a funny name, because it has 2 edges. It's, of course, something you can't say anything about, that is to say, it is ineffable, but it's unspeakable also in the sense of the word meaning something taboo. And we shall see as we go on wherein that taboo consists. But from the standpoint of logic, we can't say anything about everything. Because in order to say something about something and state it logically, you have to be able to put it in a class. Now, classes are intellectual boxes. When you play games like animal, vegetable, and mineral, you've got there 3 boxes. And when you come to think of it, you don't know any one without another. Because in order to have a box, there must be what's inside the box and what's outside the box. And then by this method of contrast, we can make a logical discussion about things. All words, therefore, are labels on intellectual pigeonholes. But then, when you come to what fundamentally is, then you're without a box. and you can't talk logically. Of course, you can distinguish is from is not, but only in a very limited way, as I can say, I have a pen in my left hand, I do not have a pen in my right hand. And from this we abstract the idea of to be and not to be, is and isn't. But when we consider being with a capital B, this includes not only such is as celestial bodies, but also such isn'ts as the space that encompasses them. And these two go together, as we shall see in more detail as the time goes on. But now a perfectly logical person would therefore say that the notion of the self, the Atman, as the fundamental reality in which everything else exists, is meaningless. And of course, from a logical point of view, it is. But at the same time, just because something cannot be put into a logical category does not indicate that it isn't real. The self, you see, bears somewhat the same relationship to the world as the diaphragm of the speaker in this radio bears to the music you've just been hearing. None of the music was about the diaphragm, and nobody said anything about there being a diaphragm. The diaphragm as such didn't come into the picture, and yet it was everything in the picture. All those different noises were vibrations of this thin film of metal. So also with your eardrum, so also with the apparatus of your eyes. So one might ask then, just as you say, well, what is it on? What is the music on? Is it on tape? Is it on a speaker? Is it on a drum? Whatever the variations may be. We can ask the question, what are you all on? What is all this on? And the Hindus answer, it's on the self. Like we say, this one's on me. It isn't that there's only one self in the sense that is taught in a philosophy called solipsism. Solipsism is the idea that you are the only person who exists and everybody else is your dream. Nobody can prove that this isn't so, except I'd like to see a congress of solipsists arguing as to which one of them is really there. Now, the Hindus do say that the self, the great self, is consciousness. But of course that does not mean consciousness in the sense of our ordinary everyday consciousness. Ordinary everyday consciousness is indeed a form of this kind of consciousness, shall we say a manifestation of it. But then there's also consciousness which doesn't notice, but nevertheless is highly responsive. The way your heart beats, the way you breathe, the way you grow your hair, you're doing it, but you don't know how it's done. So therefore, just in the same way that conscious attention is not aware of all the other operations of the body, so in just that way, we are not aware of our connection, indeed our identity, with the fundamental self. When the leaves die and fall off the trees, or the fruit drops, next year, more leaves, more fruit. So in the same way, when you and I die, more babies later. If the whole human race dies, you bet your life. There are all kinds of things that feel that they're human, scattered throughout the multiplicity of galaxies. Because this universe is a peopling universe, just as an apple tree apples. But because we are unconscious of the intervals, we are not aware of the self with our conscious attention when conscious attention isn't operating. But still, just as you don't notice what your pineal gland, say, is doing at the moment, so in the same way, you don't notice the connections which tie us all together, not only here and now, but forever and ever and ever and ever. The difficulty, and the basic reason why we don't notice the self, is that the self doesn't need to look at itself. A knife doesn't need to cut itself. Fire doesn't need to burn itself. Water doesn't need to quench itself. And a light doesn't need to shine on itself. So, this is the fundamental problem of having some sort of awareness of the self. Nevertheless, it is the whole contention of Indian philosophy, especially what we call Vedanta, that it is possible, in a certain way, to become aware of oneself in this deepest sense, to know that you are the totality. And this experience is the real substance of Indian philosophy as a whole, both Hindu and Buddhist. It is called moksha, which roughly means liberation. Liberation from the hallucination that you are just poor little me. To wake up from that kind of hypnosis and discover that you are simply something, your organism, your physical body, your conscious attention, which is your ego, that you are something being done by this vast, indescribable self, which is out of time, which has no beginning, no end. It neither continues nor discontinues. It's beyond all categorization whatsoever. And so the Upanishads say, all we can say of it positively is the negative. Neti, neti. It is not this, it is not that. Anything, therefore, you can formulate, imagine, picture, will not be the self. So when you are trying to know the self, you have to get rid of every idea in your head. It doesn't mean, as some people seem to think, that you have to get rid of every sense impression. It isn't as if you had to go into a catatonic state of total absorption. Of course, that can be done. But the full moksha, the full liberation, is when you come back out of absorption and see this everyday world just as it looks now, but see as clearly can be that it is all the self. You can become aware of this tremendous interconnectedness of everything. And that is what somebody who is moksha, who is liberated, sees. He sees, shall we say, that everything goes together. And that is, in a way, what we mean by relativity. Because relativity means relatedness. Just as fronts go with backs and tops with bottoms, insides with outsides, solids with spaces, so everything that there is goes together. And it makes no difference whether it lasts a long time or whether it lasts a short time. A galaxy goes together with all the universe just as much as a mosquito, which has a very short life. From the standpoint of the self, time is completely relative. You can have, if you scale it down, as much time between two of those very rapid drum beats as you can in eons and eons and eons. It's all a question of point of view, or, to use a scientific expression, level of magnification. Change your magnification and you see molecules. And we know by other methods of observation that it can get smaller and smaller and smaller, and that the spaces between these minute units are so vast that they're comparable to the distances between the sun and the planets in scale. So also with time. So in this sense, there could be vast, vast universes full of empires and battleships and palaces and brothels and restaurants and orchestras in the tip of your fingernail. And on the other hand, we could be all going on in the tip of somebody else's fingernail. It's very important to understand not only the relativity of size and of time, but also of what there is. Now, as you know, the human senses respond only to a very small band of the known spectrum of vibrations. We know through instruments of quite a vast spectrum, but we, as I say, with our senses, see only a little of it. If our senses were in some way altered, we would see a rather different looking world. We can do this, of course. We can put on special lenses to enable us to see heat. And then we see all the heat radiations coming out of people. And we say, well, I never noticed that about you before. But so in the same way, you see, there are infinitely many possibilities of vibration and of organs sensitive to those vibrations, so that there could be worlds within worlds within worlds, spaces within spaces, just like the many, many wavelengths of radio and television, going on forever and ever in all directions. The possibilities are infinite. But having senses and noticing is a selective process. It picks out only certain ones, just as when you play the piano. You don't take both arms and slam down all keys at once. You select. The self is also known in Sanskrit as Brahman. This is a neuter word. Brahman is from the root BRH, br, which means to expand, to grow. It isn't quite clear exactly why this word was chosen. Sometimes there's a still better word for the self, which I like, is the word tat, almost like tit for tat. Tat means that. We get our word that from the Sanskrit tat. And so when the baby comes into being, first of all, the first thing it says is da, da. The baby is pointing, da, 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 and it's saying that. Look, isn't that marvelous? That, you see? So that is the witch than which there is no witcher. And so you get the formula in this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, tat tvam asi, which means tat, that, tvam, Latin, you, asi, are. You are that. Or that thou art. That art thou. So, in this sense then, every self is modeled on and is an expression of the one self, because you all feel individually that you're the center of the world. And everything else is seen in circles, circling out, sphering out from where you are. And that's, as it were, called the microcosm, the little cosmos. But then in the same way, the macrocosm has a central self, although this is not central in the way we talk about centers in space. Do you see that? The center of a circle is in the middle of the circle, and the circumference is away from it. But you could use a phrase that the Christian theologians have used of God, that circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. You could speak of Brahman that way. It isn't in the middle of the universe, spatially speaking. You might ask the question, where is the universe? Ever thought of that one? Where is it? Well, you can't say where because everywhere has to be in relation to something. There would have to be another universe to say where this one is. But then since those two together would constitute the universe, we wouldn't still be able to say where it was. It isn't anywhere. And so in that sense, the center isn't anywhere in space, locally. And furthermore, the kind of space we are dealing with is only one possible kind of space. It's the kind of space our physical organisms are attuned to. We are, you see, like the radio. We pick up what wavelength we're on. So then, when inquirers used to come to that great modern Hindu saint, Sri Ramana Maharshi, and they'd ask him all sorts of silly questions, like, who was I in my last incarnation? What will I be in my next one? He would always reply, who is asking the question? Who are you? Find out, because that's the thing you need to know. As it were, dig down into the depths of your being and say, what is this that I call I? That's one of the very fascinating questions. It's also, it teases us out of thought to think about death in the sense of going to sleep and never waking up. Imagine that. And you find you can't. And yet, it's a thought that although you can't get to grips with it, it remains fascinating. Also the question, how is it suddenly that you awakened into this world? Where were you before? In Zen Buddhism, they have the meditation problem, the koan. Before your father and mother conceived you, what is your original nature? And that's the same sort of weird question as what it would be like to go to sleep and never wake up. What was it like to wake up having not previously gone to sleep? It's very mysterious. But as you go on and plumb this question, you begin to develop the feeling that your existence is exceedingly odd. In many ways odd. Odd because it is here and it so easily might not have been. After all, if your father hadn't met your mother, would you be here? Now, of course, somebody would be here, because he might have met somebody else. Would that be you? Of course it would. Don't you see? You can only be you by being someone. But every someone is you. Every someone is I. That's your name, you say. It's me. I am here. And everybody feels that I in the same way. It's the same feeling. Just like blue everywhere is the same color. So I-ness being, as it were, the most fundamental thing in man is also fundamental to the universe. It too is I. And our I is a special case of it. Coming out from the, in quotes, central I, like so many tits from the belly of a sow, or so many spines from a sea urchin, so many legs from a spider. And that is, of course, why the images of the Hindu gods are shown with many arms or many faces, because it is saying that all arms are the arms of the divinity. All faces are its masks. So you see, there's really nothing to worry about. Because the important you is perfectly indestructible. It's what there is. Our comings and goings, our fortunes and misfortunes are a sort of mirage. The more we know about them, the more we know about the world, the more diaphanous it seems. And therefore, everything in the world has the characteristics of smoke. You know, when you blow a cigarette or pipe or something and a cloud of smoke and you see it in the sunbeam, and it's full of whorls and designs and all kinds of marvelous things going on, and then slowly it disappears. Well, everything's just like that. Now, there are two attitudes you can take to that state of affairs. You can say sour grapes. It's all a lousy, wretched trap. And here I am, I'm given all these feelings of love and attachment and joy of life, and then I fall apart. My teeth drop out, my eyes become feeble. I get cancer or cirrhosis of the liver or something, and then it all falls apart, and it's too bad. Therefore, don't become attached to things. Don't enjoy life. Treat it, holding it up like that, just like a very, very firm person who's been jilted and says, never again will I get mixed up with love, because love hurts. But on the other hand, a weaving of smoke can be very beautiful, provided you don't lean on it, provided you don't try to preserve it, catch hold of it. Then you destroy it. So exactly the same way, there's nothing in the way of form that you can lean on, that you can grasp. And if you see that, then the world of form is very beautiful. If you let it go, to love people, you see, if you're husband and wife, you must let each other go. Otherwise, the marriage is either going to break up or it's going to be hell. If you love a person, you say to that person, look, I love you, whatever that may be. I've seen quite a bit of it, and I know there's lots that I haven't seen, but still it's you, and I want you to be what you want to be. And I won't be happy if I've got you in a cage. You'd be a bird without song. And they're likely to go on loving each other. But if they wrap each other up with all sorts of ties and chains and documents and things, then they're not on a very safe basis. The very firm words of those documents belie the situation, because nobody curses and swears and kisses the Bible and all sorts of things like that if he means yes. So when the Hindu and Buddhist philosophers speak of detachment from all this apparent world of separate beings, detachment means going with this whole thing and not resisting its change. And you can afford to go with it. You can afford to get mixed up in life and to fall in love and to get involved with all sorts of things. You can afford it if you know that it's an illusion. But this is not illusion in a bad sense of the word. Here's this Hindu word, crucial. The world is called Maya. This word, Maya, yes, it means illusion. It means magic. It means art. It means delineation or measurement. So from matra we get meter. We also get matter, material. Isn't it funny that when we say material, today we mean something very real, because the root of the word is illusion. So you see, I mean, measurement is kind of an illusion. You don't find inches lying around. You can't pick up an inch. So in the same way that hours and inches and pounds and dollars and so on are actually imaginary. They're elaborate systems of cosmic bookkeeping. with their little scratches on paper, little hairlines on dials. So, in exactly that way, the distinction between things is maya, is imaginary. But what an imagination! In a way, to say that the world is maya is at the same time to say that what lies behind maya is immaterial. You look at the reversal of the word. Oh, it's immaterial. Doesn't matter. What matters? It's all this. But that gets us to a deeper point yet. The self, the real self, doesn't matter. Which is another way of saying it doesn't exist for any purpose. It doesn't need to exist for any purpose. What purpose would it exist for? When it's what there is. It doesn't need, it won't find anything in the future. Has nothing in the past that it has to go back and remember. Is now, an eternal now. And so in that way, it doesn't matter. But therefore, the most important thing in the universe is the one thing that doesn't matter, the one thing that's totally and completely useless, and that nobody can find anything for. Once a Zen master was asked, what is the most valuable thing in the world? And he answered, the head of a dead cat. Why? Because no one can put a price on it. So this self, the Brahman, is like the head of a dead cat. But you see, if then you say, I really ought to get that dead cat's head because something spiritual about it and it'd be very good for me. After all, if I knew the self, I might be a better person. People might like me more. I'd be more constructive in society. I would do this, that, and the other. You see, that's putting the cart before the horse. That's trying to make the tail wag the dog. The knowledge of Brahman, the self, never does anybody any good if they're trying to make it do them some good. Only when they're not concerned with whether it does them any good or not, does it do them any good. It's like when you relax and you go out and play. Americans in particular don't know how to do this because they're always justified. They always say it's good for me. It's exercise. It is to change from work and that'll be able to make me work better. See? Everything they do is done for some serious reason. It's the Protestant conscience. And so we never play. Except very exceptionally. Because play is that which is done just for itself, for fun. So the self, the Atman, the Brahman, exists for fun. It has no reason to exist. It's completely useless. And it is, therefore, Maya is linked with the word Leela. And that means play. Also, of course, the word illusion in English is derived from the Latin ludere, to play. So the nature, you might say, of the self is that it does no work. It only plays. Work is something serious, that you do for a purpose because you believe that you've got to go on living. You work to survive because you think you have to survive. That was one of the things they told you as a little child. You've got to go on, man. But you don't have to. This thing doesn't have to go on. That's why it does. I know that sounds paradoxical, but there's so many things in life that are like that. If I'm trying to impress people, I usually don't. If you try too hard with anything, you usually make a mess of it. And so this basic thing then is that the self, the Brahman behind the world, is engaged in play. It is in this sense that the Hindu philosophers say Brahman does not actually become the world. The meaning of that is he's playing at being it, or it's playing at being it, as distinct from working at it. And so in certain Oriental countries, when one refers to noble people of high birth, it is often said, so Lord so-and-so has died. The Japanese would say he's played at dying. Or will he play at taking a journey to Tokyo? Also, remember this, although I've constantly used in this talk the word one to apply to the self and central, the Hindus don't use this word except speaking poetically and loosely. The self is not one. The self is called non-dual. Because you see, the idea of one has an opposite. The opposite of one is many, or none. But the which than which there is no whicher has no opposite. There's nothing outside it. So you can't call it one, because one is an exclusive idea. It excludes two. So they call it, instead of one, they call it non-dual, which is Advaita. This is from the word, you see, Deva is the root meaning two. The V becomes U, so we get dual. And A is the meaning in Sanskrit often non. Non-dual, Advaita. And so it doesn't exclude anything. One is an exclusive word. Advaita is meant to be a totally inclusive kind of unity. Now, of course, this word itself, when you look at it from a logical standpoint, is a dualistic word, just like one. It's the opposite of Dvaita, Dvaita and Advaita. But the idea here in Indian philosophy is to use this word in a certain way. Now, you know that on a flat surface, you can't draw 3 dimensions. Anything you draw will be in 2 dimensions. But why do we see 3 dimensions? Because of an artistic convention called one-pointed perspective, which will give you the illusion of a 3rd dimension. Now, in other words, a 2-dimensional line is being used to imply a 3rd dimension which can never be expressed on a flat surface. So in exactly the same way, Advaita is a word used specially to designate what lies beyond all logical categories. So you must remember, of course, that the word play and the word game have many levels of meaning. We are accustomed to use the word play in opposition to work and to regard play as trivial and work as serious. Very largely, a game or a play is something associated in our minds with triviality. You're only playing with me, says a girl to a suitor. You're not serious. How serious do you have to be? When does one get serious in a flirtation? When do we say this is getting serious? When you're holding hands, playing footsies under the table, kissing, petting, sleeping together, married and babies. Maybe that's serious. But we also use the word play in a non-trivial sense. I went to hear Heifetz playing the violin. Was that a trivial matter? On the contrary, the very highest kind of art form. Still play. I say too, when I do philosophy, like I'm doing with you, this is entertainment, but in the sense perhaps, I hope, of your listening to someone play a musical classic. I'm not being serious, but I am being sincere. The difference, you see, between seriousness and sincerity is that seriousness is someone speaking in the context of the possibility of tragedy. That there is a situation where things might go absolutely wrong. And then I put on the expression which is serious. That's why soldiers on parade are always serious. They don't laugh. And when they salute the flag, they put on a stern expression. That's why in courts of law and in churches, people don't normally laugh, because all that we deal with here is very important, a matter of life and death. But the fundamental question must be brought forth, is God serious? And obviously the answer is no, because there's nothing to be serious about. I said also that the self, as conceived, the supreme self, was quite useless, that it was immaterial, it doesn't matter, because it transcends all values of what is better or worse, what is upwards or downwards, what is good and bad. It so weaves the world that the good and the bad play together, like the black and white pieces in the game of chess. So, play is deeply the sort of thing children like to do with deep absorption and fascination, to drop pebbles into the water and watch the concentric circles of waves. Or mathematicians. Mathematicians, you know, especially what we call higher mathematicians, are entirely lacking in seriousness. They couldn't give a hoot in hell as to whether what they're doing has any practical application. They are working entirely on interesting puzzles. The basic form of the cosmic game, according to the Hindu view, is the game of hide and seek. Or you might call it the game of lost and found. Or again, now you see it, now you don't. In examining the nature of vibration, we find a very peculiar thing. If you represent vibration as a wave motion, you will notice that there is no such manifestation as half a wave. We do not find in nature crests without troughs or troughs without crests. No sound is produced unless there is both. Both the beat, as it were, and the interval between. Now, this wave phenomenon is happening on ever so many scales. There is the very, very fast wave of light, the slower wave of sound. Then there are all sorts of other wave processes. The beat of the heart, the rhythm of the breath, waking and sleeping, the peak of human life from birth to maturity and down again to death. And the slower the wave goes, the more difficult it is to see that the crest and the trough are inseparable. So that we become persuaded in the game of hide and seek that it is possible for the trough to go down and down and down forever and never rise again into a crest. forgetting that trough implies crest, just as crest implies trough. There is no such thing, you see, as pure sound. Sound is sound silence. Light is light darkness. Light is pulsation. And between every light pulse, there is the dark pulse. And so the Hindu image is that the self eternally plays a game of hide and seek with itself. Hindus calculate time in kalpa units. And the kalpa is 4,320,000 years. And so they say that for a period of a kalpa, the worlds are manifested, or any particular universe, not all universes, but let's say any particular galaxy or whatever it may be, world order of some kind. Don't take this too literally. Don't take these figures as being some sort of divine revelation as to making predictions and prophecies. They're symbolic figures. So, for one kalpa, the world is manifested, and that period is called in Sanskrit a manvantara. And during that time, the Brahman plays hide. And it hides in all of us, pretending that it's us. And then at the end of the kalpa, there comes the period called pralaya. And that also is a kalpa long. And in that period, the Brahman, as it were, comes out of the act and returns to itself in peace and bliss. This is a very logical idea. What would you do if you were God? Isn't the whole fun of things, as every child knows, to go on adventures, to make believe, to create illusions, that is to say patterns. And so, for some ways of talking in Hindu thought, this world is the dream of the Godhead. The Godhead is, of course, represented as in a way two-faced. With one face, he dreams and is absorbed in the dream world. With the other face, he is liberated. In other words, what you have to understand correctly is that from the standpoint of the self, the supreme self, the pralaya and the manvantara are simultaneous. But put into mythological form, for human consumption, they are represented as being in sequence, following each other. But they really happen at the same time. So that one doesn't realize union with the self after death, later than a certain time. All references to the hereafter should correctly be understood as the herein, as a domain deeper than egocentric consciousness. That is to say, when you get down to the bottom of the egocentric consciousness, you get to its limit, which is figuratively its death. Then you go on inwards, the self deeper than the conscious attention. And in that way, you go inwards to eternity. You don't go onwards to eternity. To go onwards is to find only time and time and time and more time and more time, in which things go round and round and round forever. But to go in is to go to eternity. But in the ordinary way, when we're talking about this graphically and vividly, in imagistic terms, we can talk about the everlasting game of hide and seek, which the self plays with itself. It forgets who it is and then creeps up behind itself and says, boo! And that's a great thrill. It pretends that things are getting serious, just as a great actor on the stage Although the audience know that what they're seeing is only a play, the skill of the actor is to take the audience in and to have them all sitting in anxiety on the edges of their seats, or to be weeping or laughing, or utterly involved in what they really know is only a play. So you would imagine that if there were a very great actor with absolutely superb technique, he would take himself in. And he, you see, would feel that the play was real. Well, that's their idea of what we're doing here and now. Now then, this works on a little plan. Let us consider the breakdown of a single kalpa. It consists of 4 yugas. Yuga. That means an epoch. Number 1 is called Krita, or sometimes Satya. And these names are based on the Hindu game of dice. There are 4 throws in their game, and Krita means the perfect throw, the throw of 4. Number 2 is Treta, the throw of 3. Number 3 is Dvapara, the throw of 2. And number 4 is Kali. That's the worst throw, the throw of value 1. Now, you will see that these yugas divide up a period of 4,320,000 years. I never remember numbers too well. So, the first yuga is 1,780,000 years long. The second is 1,296,000 years. The third, the Dvapara, is 864,000. And the Kali Yuga is 432,000. Now you see what's happening here. When the manifestation starts, it's as good as possible. Everything is just glorious. Because you know well that if you were dreaming anything you wanted to dream, you would start out by having the most luscious dreams imaginable. Now, when we get, you see, to the Treta Yuga, something is a little bit wrong. Krita is 4 square. Everything's perfect, like the symbol of the square is an ancient symbol of perfection. Treta is the triangle. Something's missing. There's a little bit of uncertainty, and danger now enters. By the time we get to Dvapara, the forces of light and darkness are equal. Duality, the pair. But when we get to Kali, the force of darkness overcomes. But now you see what happens is, if you take 1/3 of the Treta Yuga as being on the bad side, half of the Dvapara Yuga as being on the bad side, and all of the Kali Yuga, and you add those figures up, you will get the bad side occupying only 1/3 of the total time. So what's going on here? It is not quite a situation, you see. It's not a view of the cosmos in which good and evil are so evenly balanced that nothing happens. Evil is just troublesome enough to give good a run for its money. It's as the game that is being played here is playing order against chaos. But you've got to have some chaos in order to play the game of order against it. But if order wins, there's no further game. If chaos wins, there's no further game. If they're equally balanced, it's a stalemate. So what happens is this. Chaos is always losing, but is never defeated. It's the good loser. And that is a game that is worth the candle. Let's take playing chess. If you get an opponent who can always defeat you, you stop playing with him. If you get an opponent whom you can always defeat, you stop playing with them. But so long as there is a certain uncertainty of outcome, and you win some of the time, then it's a good game. And this is simply a number symbolism, as I said again, not to be taken literally, of the way this thing works. So the mythology says that we are now in the Kali Yuga, which started a little before 3000 BC. So we've got a long way to go to the end of it if you're going to take this literally. But of course, people have a way of always being in the Kali Yuga. We can go back to Egyptian inscriptions from 6000 BC, which say is that the world is going hopelessly to the dogs. That's always been the complaint. But according to this mythology, there are you have to realize the Lord, the Brahman, in three aspects. One is Brahma, the creative principle. Two is Vishnu, the preserving principle. And three is Shiva, the destroying principle. And Shiva is very important here. Shiva is always represented in Hindu imagery as a yogi. He is the destroyer in the sense of being the liberator, the cracker of shells so that chickens can come forth, the breaker up of mothers so that their children can be unsmothered, the liberative destruction, the bonfire. That's why devotees of Shiva like to do their meditations along the banks of the Ganges where they burn dead bodies. Because through destruction, life is constantly renewed. Shiva has a paramour, and her name is Kali, but that is a different word than this Kali. You mustn't confuse the two. And Kali is much worse than Shiva. She is black, and she has a long, long tongue, and her eye teeth are like fangs, but she's very beautiful otherwise. Has a lovely figure, but she's black. And in one hand, her right hand, she carries a scimitar, and in her left, she carries a severed head hanging by the hair. And Kali, who is Shiva's, you see, Shiva is normally considered wedded. All the gods have their paramours, and they're all examples of the one central self. She's called Parvati, but that's her bright aspect. But her dark aspect is Kali. And Kali is the awful awfuls, the thing above all that men most dread. Kali is outer darkness. Kali is the end. She may be represented as a blood-sucking octopus, as a spider mother that eats its spouse. And Kali is the principle of total night. And yet there are those in India like Sri Ramakrishna, for whom Kali is the supreme mother goddess. Because she is two-faced. She is playful and terrifying, loving and devouring. Destroyer and savior. And the cult of Kali has its importance, helping one to see the light principle in the very depths of darkness. I have some suggestions for meditation on Kali, which you can all practice very easily. You go to the aquarium, and you find out there the monsters of the deep that make you feel most uncomfortable, and you study them. So in this way, Kali is studied by her devotees. And if you meditate on those, this will be like putting manure on the soil. And out of all this apparently morbid and dismal thinking, bright things will begin to arise, because you will realize that what Kali is the most far-out act that the Supreme Self can put on. The symbol of complete alienation from itself. Well, now, you see, this involves certain ideas that are quite alien to the West. One, the idea of the world as play. Our Lord God in the West tends to be over-serious. And no great Christian artist has ever painted a laughing Christ or a smiling Christ. Nothing that I've seen of any of the great masters. Always, this figure is tragic and has that sort of look in the eye which says, one of these days you and I have got to get together for a very serious talk. So you see, there is some difficulty about the notion of the world as dramatic play for us. There's another difficult notion here, and that is cyclic time. See, most of us live in linear time. This originated with St. Augustine and his interpretation of the Bible. Now, I don't know how true this really is, but it's certainly a big fashion in modern scholarship to say that it was Judaism that gave us the idea of history. Hindus have no interest in history whatsoever, or not until recent times. To the total exasperation of historians, there is no way of finding textual evidence of the age of most of the Hindu scriptures, because they aren't interested in history as such. They are only interested in human events as archetypal occurrences, as repetitions of the great mythological themes over and over again. So if in a document started out that a certain adventure happened to King so-and-so, whom everybody knew at the time, in the next generation, they'd change the name of that king to the current king, because the story was typical anyway. They just wanted to say a king everybody knew. They altered things in that way, and so they know no kind of chronology. And if you ask even quite intelligent Asians about this, they have difficulty in understanding what kind of a question you're asking. What is this history thing? Whereas on the other hand, according to our scholars, the Jews were historically minded because they remembered the story of their descent from Adam and Abraham, the great event of the liberation from Egypt, and then the triumphant reign of King David. And then things go sliding downhill as other political forces become stronger and stronger. And so they get fixed on the idea that one day is going to be the day of the Lord. And the Messiah will come and put an end to history. And there will be the restoration of paradise. But this is linear. They don't think of the world having been created many, many times before. and come to an end many, many times before. It's one clear ascent from start to finish, from Alpha to Omega. Well, when St. Augustine was thinking about this, he thought, if time is cyclic, Jesus would have to be crucified for the salvation of the world once in every cycle. But for some reason, he had it firmly fixed into his head that there was only one historical crucifixion in time. What they call the one full, perfect, sufficient sacrifice, oblation, and satisfaction for the sins of the whole world. Once is enough. Now, of course, he got his hierarchies confused. It's true, there is one sacrifice, but that's on the plane of eternity. On the plane of time, eternal things can be repeated again and again and again. But so, as a result of that, we are handed down, not a Greek, the Greeks also had cyclic time, like the Hindus, but we have been handed down linear time, and therefore we are always thinking of a progression that will take us steadily, faster and faster, to a more and more perfect world. And it will get better and better and better and better all the way along, if we keep our heads. Now, this shows, I think, a rather naive view of human nature. Human beings tend to smash what they create and say, let's do it again. There is that in man, which is also in the child. Rub it out. What fun. And so it isn't really too realistic to suppose that human beings will simply get better and better and better and better and better, because they'll soon get tired of it. They say, let's be as awful as possible. I started out yesterday to discuss what the self means in Hindu philosophy. The principle tat tvam asi, that art thou, meaning that the self is the basis of all being. And being is not something into which we come, but out of which we proceed. In popular language, we say, I came into this world, as if you came from somewhere else altogether, from outside. But you don't. You come out of this world, just in the same way as the leaves come from the tree. And so in that way you are an expression of it, and the self meaning itself, self meaning identity, self meaning basis, ground, is what everybody fundamentally is. Then I went on to discuss the world as the self in the sense of the cosmos as the self. The great cycles of time in which, according to Hindu philosophy and mythology, the world is manifested and then again withdrawn. And now I want to go on to discuss the human world as the self. Well, now, there have in the known history of mankind been about 3 types of culture. We'll call them hunting cultures, agrarian cultures, and industrial cultures. The hunting culture seems to have been the earliest. And agrarian cultures arose when hunters learned to farm and therefore had to settle in certain places. And it was then that men built cities. And when we pass from the hunting to the agrarian culture, we notice 2 very important changes occur. In the hunting culture, every man is expert in the whole culture. That's because he spends a good deal of time alone in the forests or on the hills. And so he has to know how to make clothes, how to cook, how to build, how to fight, ride, and all those things. But as soon as people become settled in cities, we get a division of labor. Because it's obviously more practical when you're all living together for some people to specialize in some things and some in others. The other important difference is the difference of religion between the hunting culture and the agrarian culture. The religious man of the hunting culture is generally known as a shaman, S-A-H-A-M-A-N. And a shaman is a kind of weird individual, and I mean weird in the ancient sense of the word, not queer, but weird in the sense of magic. Because he is a person of a peculiar type of sensitivity who finds initiation into the shaman role by going off by himself for a long time into the depths of the forests or the heights of the mountains. And in that isolation, he comes in touch with a domain of consciousness which is known by all sorts of names: the spirit world, the ancestors, the gods, or whatever. And his knowledge of that world is supposed to give him a peculiar powers of healing, of prophecy, of magic in general. The thing that you must note, though, about a shaman is that his initiation is found by himself. He does not receive initiation from an order or a guru. On the other hand, the religious man of the agrarian community is a priest. And a priest is almost invariably an ordained person. He receives his power from a community of priests or from a guru. In other words, from tradition. Tradition is all important in the agrarian community. Now then, reasonably enough, the first communities are stockaded enclosures. They are made of palings. And so we speak of people being within the pale and beyond the pale. And because the word paling we still use in fencing, and you know that the Spanish for a tree is palo. So here is a primitive stockaded community. And as often as not, this community will settle at a crossroads for obvious reasons. Where roads cross, that's where people meet. And so it's liable to have 4 gates and these crossing main streets. And that immediately establishes 4 divisions of the city. And so oddly enough, in Hindu society, there are 4 castes based on the 4 fundamental divisions of labor. And number 1 is the caste of priests, and they're called Brahmana. Number 2 is the caste of warriors, and also rulers, and they're called Kshatriya. Number 3 is the caste of merchants and tradesmen, and they're called Vaishya. And number 4 are laborers, and they are called Shudra. So those are the 4 principal roles in the world of settled humanity. It's interesting, I said people settled in cities because they had to plant. And there are many legends to the effect that what they were mostly concerned with planting were grapes for wine, and they cultivated vineyards. When you enter society, you are born into a caste. And this is very understandable in a community where you don't have a generalized system of education. You don't go to school, and therefore you learn what to do in life from your parents and your family. So if you grow up as a carpenter's son, it never occurs to you to do anything else but carpentry. Why would you? You might become a better carpenter than your father, but still that would be the natural thing to do. It's only when one is exposed to school and then the people begin to talk about, well, what do you want to be in life? That people get the idea that they might be anything. So if this sort of way of life is natural to you, you don't find it particularly objectionable. Of course, all kinds of weird complications and rituals and prohibitions grow up in the course of time that can make this system very cumbersome, as it has been until quite recently in India. Then what happens is this. You go through an evolution in your development in this community, which has first of all the stage called brahmacharya, studentship or apprenticeship. After that you enter the stage of grihastha, meaning householder. And a householder has two duties. One is called artha, A-R-T-H-A, and the other kama, K-A-M-A. Artha means the duties of citizenship, partaking in the political life of the community. Kama, K-A-M-A, means the cultivation of the senses, of aesthetic and sensual beauty. And therefore kama includes the art of love, the arts of beautification, of dress, of cooking, and all that kind of thing. So that the Kama Sutra is the scripture about love. Kama, in a sense, means passion, and is the great Hindu manual of how to behave sexually. It's a book that every child ought to read on gaining puberty, so that he would get some sense of how to make love without being a mere baboon. Then there is also the Artha Shastra, and that is the scripture about rulers and the way of the Kshatriya caste. Now, so you've got these stages now. Brahmacharya, which is studentship, Artha and Kama, they go together, and they constitute the duties of grihastha, of a householder. Beyond that, there is the duty of dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A, and dharma has many, many meanings in Sanskrit. It can mean something like law or justice. Could even mean slightly righteousness, but not as we have come to understand that word in common speech today. Perhaps rightness would be better than righteousness. But dharma has a primary meaning of method. So when we speak of the Dharma of the Buddha's doctrine, it is the Buddha's method, not law. So a citizen also has to conform to Dharma, and that is to say to ritual and ethical and moral game rules for the community. But now, when in the course of time he has established his household, he has taught his oldest son to take over the governorship of the household, the father, or for that matter, mother, may enter into a new stage of life altogether, which is not grihastha, but is called vanaprastha, And that means forest dweller, as distinct from householder. Now you see what's happened. We've gone full cycle. We came out of the forest as a hunter. We settled in a community and indulged in what is called in Sanskrit loka sangraha. Sangraha means upholding. Loka, the world. Upholding the world game. And that is everybody's dharma or duty. Dharma can also be translated duty. And svadharma, SVA in front of dharma, means your own duty, or better, your own function, which we would translate into English as vocation. So everybody's caste work is his svadharma. When you have fulfilled your svadharma, you go into the vanaprastha stage. Now, anciently that meant that you actually did go out into the forest, and you became, of all things, it's called a shramana in Sanskrit. S-R-A-M-A-N-A. And it is thought that that is the word shaman. You see, what happens is this then, that an individual who all his life long has played the social game is then says, well, now I've done that. I've assumed this role, I've become identified with Tinker Tailor, Soldier Sailor, whatever it was. But now who am I? Really? In order to find that out, I have to go off by myself. Why? Because you have a role conception, a masked conception of yourself, because other people tell you who you are. We are constantly, in every social interchange, in the most common remarks, telling other people who they are. Everything leads up to that. The way I act towards you, the way you act towards me, tells me who I am and tells you who you are. For example, you come and sit here and listen to me talk. You are, by doing that, telling me I'm some kind of a teacher. And you're telling yourselves that you're some kind of students. And that's only one thing, you see, one little incident. In business, every day, in your housework and everything you do, everybody around you is telling you what you are and who you are by expecting certain behavior from you, which if you're a reasonable and socially inclined person, you perform, because that's what's expected of you. So you are told who you are. So when we'd had enough of that, you see. But says, no, let's not listen to all this anymore. That's why the shramana, or the vanaprastha, one of the first things he practices is silence. It's called mauna, M-A-U-N-A. And he may take a vow not to speak for a month or a year. And after about a month of mauna, you don't only stop talking, but you stop thinking in words. And that's a very curious experience when it happens, because all the senses take on a tremendous intensity. You see things which you've never seen before, because you stop codifying and classifying the world by thinking. Sunsets appear incredibly more vivid, and flowers are enchanting. The whole world comes alive to the Mauni. The only danger is this: the Mauni has to be careful, because he loses all moral discrimination. In other words, if a Mauni gets involved in a riot, he joins the riot. Because that's just the way things are going, you see. And so he has to be careful. And that's why, in this state of vanaprastha, the new man in the game will seek out a guru, a teacher, who has been through the whole discipline of yoga, or whatever it is, that is practiced by a vanaprastha and will help him out and see that he doesn't get into trouble. That's why a guru, when he accepts a student, is always said to become responsible for that individual's karma. Karma, you know, means activity, and also the results of activity. So you see what's happened. This man who goes into the vanaprastha stage of life takes off every sign that would identify him as someone. He does away with his name. He does away with the usual clothes he would wear and puts on usually a yellow or some kind of a robe, or he may more often than that be really naked and maybe have a loincloth or not even that. And often these people cover themselves with ashes, and their hair is matted, and they don't take care of themselves that way anymore because they're outside the pale. You see, they are outcasts, but they are upper outcasts. Below them are the lower outcasts, known as today the Harijan, the name that Gandhi gave them, the untouchables. And the untouchables were the aboriginal peoples of India. When the Aryan invasion occurred, at a rather vague date, but shortly after 2000 BC, the Aryans formed these castes, and the people who were originally in the land, like the Indians here, were considered to be outcasts. So you have here a marvelous microcosm. You have a political and social analog of the manifestation and withdrawal of the worlds, of the Lord playing the game, or the self playing the game of being all of us, and then as each individual reaches moksha, the self realizes in terms of an individual life that it is the self. So exactly in this way, the child, representing the self on the way in, comes into this world, plays around for a while. There are 4 castes, just as there are 4 yugas to the Kalpa cycle, you remember? And then out it goes, back to the forest. We would say back to nature. But you see, the outgoing stage of vanaprastha is a much higher state in the course of evolution than the hunting society person who is primitive. He isn't simply going back to where he came from. He's spiraled. He's come round to an equivalent position, but at a higher level. And what he has gained in the interim is self-awareness. I mean that too in the ordinary sense when we speak of self-consciousness. See, it's not much fun to be happy and not know it. We need a certain resonance. Self-consciousness is an echo in our heads, an echo of what we do, but wouldn't be aware of doing it if there wasn't an echo. When you see yourself in a mirror, that mirror is a visual echo of your face. And that's why in a room such as this, it's a very comfortable room for me to talk in, because it has resonance. And so self-consciousness is neurological resonance. Now you know how troublesome resonance can get if it's not properly worked out. You can get echoes that just won't stop. So you go into a great cave somewhere and you say, hi! It says, hi, 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 all off in the distance, see? That's very confusing. Now that's the sort of snarl that self-consciousness can get into, and we call it anxiety. When I keep thinking, did I do the right thing? In the course of some performance, if I'm constantly aware of myself in a kind of anxious, critical way, my resonance becomes too high. And so I get confused and jittery. But if you learn that self-consciousness has limits, that self-awareness cannot possibly enable you to be free of making mistakes. You can learn to be spontaneous in spite of being self-aware and enjoy the echo. So what happens, that having developed self-consciousness through education, through work with other people, having developed all the disciplines of the culture, the vanaprastha then becomes again as a child. But then, you see, he has what Freud says the child has from the beginning. Freud called it the oceanic feeling. And the oceanic feeling is the sensation of being one with the universe. The vanaprastha gets that back. But it's not a child's oceanic feeling. It's an adult's oceanic feeling. Something which the psychoanalysts don't discuss. Because according to them, all oceanic feelings are regressive. But there is a mature oceanic feeling as contrasted with the immature oceanic feeling of the child, which is as different as the oak is from the acorn. And so you can have this sensation, you see, of total unity with the cosmos, of the, shall I call it, expansion to infinity or contraction to infinity of your identity, without forgetting society's game rules with regard to you. In other words, it doesn't mean that you forget your address, telephone number, social security number, and the name you were given. You remember all that. And you can play that game when necessary. But you know it's a game. So, there is no way, as a matter of fact, of escaping from playing these games. And the only thing is that when you find out, you see, that you are thoroughly selfish, you inquire, what is the self that I love? What is this thing that I'm so interested in advancing and in protecting? And you look very closely into what you feel when you think you feel yourself. And you know what you find out? That yourself is everything that you thought was someone else, or something else. You have no knowledge of yourself, you see, except in relation to others. Self and other are as inseparable as back and front. There is no knowledge of self without the knowledge of otherness. There is no knowledge of the voluntary without the knowledge of the involuntary, of can without can't. So they go together. And that going together of self and other is non-duality. That's Advaita. That is the self with a capital S. So through self, one finds deliverance from self. And so finally we come to the last consideration, which is the question, in what way and by what means can an individual who is under the impression that he is a separate individual, limited by and enclosed in his bag of skin, how can such a person effectively realize that he is deep down the universal self, the Brahman? This, of course, is a curious question. It proposes a journey to the place where you already are. Now, it's true that you may not know that you are there, but you are. And if you take a journey to the place where you are, you will visit many other places than the place where you are. And perhaps when you find through some long experience that all the places you go to are not the place you wanted to find, it may occur to you that you were already there in the beginning. And that is the Dharma, or method, as I translated that word, which all gurus, teachers of spiritual development, use fundamentally. They are all of them tricksters, but in the most beneficent sense of the word trickster. Why trickster? Because, do you know, it's terribly difficult, in fact it's impossible, to surprise yourself on purpose. And yet, to be surprised is a great thing. But you can't plan a surprise for yourself. Somebody else can do it for you. And that is why so often a guru or teacher is necessary in this process. But let me say right from the start that a guru, there are many kinds of gurus. First of all, among human gurus, there are square gurus and there are beat gurus. There are gurus like, well, let's say a great Zen master today. Let's take Oda Roshi at Daitokuji, who is a square guru and a very good one. But you go through regular channels. Then there is a guru like Mr. Gurdjieff, who is a rascal guru, who leads you in by means that are very, very strange indeed. Then there are gurus that are not people. The gurus may be situations, a certain kind of problem or encounter. Even a book can to some extent be a guru. A friend can be a guru. I've often thought of writing a story about a man who is some sort of guru seeker and potential yogi, who goes one day into an automat and sits down at a table where there is another fellow, and he sort of thinks that this man looks wise, and he projects onto him the idea that he is a guru. And he says, I feel there's something special about you. And the man says, oh, really? Really, actually, there's nothing special about me. I happen to be an insurance salesman. And this other fellow says, isn't that fascinating how modest he is? And then I want to develop this story, step by step. They keep meeting each other because they both eat at the same automat regularly for lunch. And although the fellow really is an insurance salesman and doesn't know a thing about these things, it in the end results in the enlightenment of the person who projected this image upon him. So there are, as I say, many kinds of guru. But the problem of the guru is to show the inquirer in some effective way that he already has what he's looking for. In Hindu traditions, the realization of who you really are is called basically sadhana. And sadhana means the discipline, the way of life that is necessary to follow in order to escape from the illusion that you are merely an skin-encapsulated ego. And sadhana comprises yoga, from the root yug, which means to join, And so from that, in Latin, we get jungere, to join, and in English, junction, and also yoke. And junction is also the word union, you see. All this derives from the Sanskrit root, yug. A yoke is also a discipline. When you yoke oxen, that is a kind of a discipline. Now, strictly speaking, in the very strictest sense, yoga means the state of union, the state in which the individual self, what is called the Jivatman. Jivatman is approximately translatable as ego. Jivatman finds that it is ultimately Atman, which equals Brahman, the Supreme Self. So yoga is the state. The strictest meaning of yoga is the state of union, and a yogi means one who has realized that union. But we find that the word is not normally used in that way, in that strict sense. Yoga, in the normal way of use, means the practice of meditation, whereby one comes into the state of union. Supposing that I say to you, each one of you is really the great self, you know, the Brahman. And you say, well, all you've said up till now makes me fairly sympathetic to this intellectually, but I don't really feel it. What must I do to feel it really? My answer to you is this. You ask me that question because you don't want to feel it really. You're frightened of it. And therefore, what you're going to do is you're going to get a method of practice so that you can put it off. So that I can say, well, I can be a long time on the way getting this thing. And then maybe I'll be worthy of it after I have suffered enough. See, because we are brought up in a social scheme whereby we have to deserve what we get. And the price that one pays for all good things is suffering. But all of that is precisely postponement, because one is afraid here and now to see it. If you had the nerve, you know, real nerve, you would see it right away. Only that would be, you know, when one feels you shouldn't have nerve like that. Why, that would be awful. That would be, that wouldn't do at all. Because after all, I'm supposed to be poor little me. And I'm not really much of a muchness. And I'm playing the role of being poor little me. And therefore, in order to be something great, like a Buddha or a Jivan Mukta, one liberated in this life, I ought to suffer for it. So you can suffer for it. There are all kinds of ways invented for you to do this. And you can discipline yourself, and you can gain control of your mind, and you can do all sorts of extraordinary things. I mean, you can drink water in through your rectum and do the most fantastic things. But that's just like being able to run the 100 yards in 9 seconds, or push a peanut up Mount Tamalpais with your nose, or any other kind of accomplishment you want to engage in. There's absolutely nothing to do with the realization of the self. The realization of the self fundamentally depends on coming off it. You know, the sort of, when we say to people who put on some kind of an act, we say, oh, come off it. And some people can come off it. They laugh and say they suddenly realize, they were making fools of themselves, and they laugh at themselves and they come off it. So in exactly the same way, the guru, the teacher, is trying to make you come off it. Now, if he finds he can't make you come off it, he's going to put you through all these exercises so that you, at the last time, when you've got enough discipline, enough suffering, and enough frustration, you'll give it all up and realize you were there for the beginning and there was nothing to realize. But the guru is very clever. He says, all right, if this is the way you have to go, this is the way you have to go. You asked for it. You came to me. I didn't invite you, you see, the guru says. You came to me and said, I want to learn yoga. Well, he said, yoga is union. You're tattvamasi, you're that. Well, no, you say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that because I only get it intellectually. I don't feel it. Oh, he says, you're one of those. So, see, I've got to satisfy you. The customer is always right. No? I've got to give you all this work to do. Because you can't see directly that this is so. But he's looking at you in a funny way, you see. The guru is always saying to you, what are you doing? What's your game? Imagine, for example, a father confessor. And you feel terribly guilty that you've committed murders and robberies and adulteries and fornications and all kinds of arson and injury to people and financial shenanigans. And you go to this man and say, I am a terrible sinner. Oh, he says, really? He said, I have murdered somebody. He says, how many times? And you think, oh, good Lord, this man doesn't realize how awful I am. And you recite all these things. He's perfectly calm. And then you say to him, well, you don't seem to be very shocked. Well, he said, you haven't confessed any serious sins. He said, what do you mean by a serious sin? Well, he said, what do you think? Well, I don't know. I just feel wrong. I just feel there's something in the basis of me that tells me that I am not what I ought to be. Could it be that I'm spiritually proud? That I'm egocentric? He says, no, that's not. This is very usual. This is quite ordinary sin. But he says, you are guilty of something really terrible. And what could that be? Well, I have no idea. No, he says, come on. Go deeper. What is the real sin you've committed? And you think, what, me? I, little me, could do something worse than murder, worse than spiritual pride? Does little me? I mean, I'm a reasonably well-intentioned person. What could that be? And he looks at you in a funny way. Says, you know. It's a kind of a Kafkaesque situation where you're accused of a crime that's not specified, and yet the accuser says, you jolly well know what you've done. Of course, we can't mention it. Because, it's like those laws that are on the books in the state of California and several other states where people are accused of the abominable crime against nature. Nobody knows what it is. I mean, it can't be mentioned. It's too dreadful to be talked about. So this guy does the same thing, but it's in a different dimension. You've done it. Now, what did you do? See, the real crime is that you won't admit you're God. That's false modesty. So the guru challenges, you see. He challenges you. If you raise the question, he doesn't go out and preach in the streets and say, come on, everybody, you ought to be converted. He sits down under a tree and waits. And people start coming around, and they offer him propositions. He answers back. And he challenges you. in any way that he thinks is appropriate to your situation. Now, if you've got a thin shell and your mask is easily dispatched with, he simply uses what we might call an easy method. He says, listen, Shiva, come off it. Don't pretend you're this guy here. I know who you are. And the guy sort of twinkles a bit and says, well, I guess you're right. To understand yoga, you need to get hold of a good translation of Patanjali, the Yoga Sutra. I don't know which is the best translation. There are so many of them. It says, it starts out, now yoga is explained. First verse. And the commentators say now has a special meaning because it follows from something else that you're supposed to know beforehand. That you're supposed to be, in other words, a civilized human being before you start out on yoga. We don't teach yoga to baboons. And so you're supposed to have been disciplined in artha, kama, and dharma. In politics, sensuality, and dharma, justice. And then you can start yoga. Then the next verse is yogas chitta vritti nirodha, which means yoga is the cessation of revolutions of the mind. In other words, you can interpret that at many levels. Chitta meaning consciousness, like a pool, like water, like a reflecting pool. If there are waves on that, it doesn't reflect, it breaks up all the reflections. So stop the waves on the mind and it will reflect reality clearly. Get a perfectly calm mind. That's one meaning of it. Or another meaning of it is stop thinking. Eliminate all contents from the mind, all thoughts, all feelings, all sensations, everything. How will you do that? Well, it goes on to say you do it by certain steps. First of all, pranayama, which means the control of the breath. Pratyahara, which means preliminary concentration. Dharana, a more intense form of concentration. Dhyana, which is the same, jhana is Sanskrit for Zen, and that means profound union between subject and object. And finally, samadhi, which is way out. Now what's happening here? Control your mind. First of all, by breathing. Breathing is a very strange thing because breathing can be viewed both as an involuntary and as a voluntary action. You can feel I breathe, and yet you can feel it breathes me. And they have all sorts of fancy breathing ways in yoga. They are very amusing to practice because you can get very high on them. So they set you up these tricks. And of course, if you are bright, you may begin to realize some things at that point. If you're not very bright, then you'll have to go on. And so next they really get to work on concentration. Concentrate the mind on one point. Now this can be an absolutely fascinating undertaking. I suggest that you try it this way if you want to make experiments. Select a highlight on some bright, some polished surface, copper or glass or something, where there's a little tiny reflection, say of a candle or an electric light bulb. Look at it and put your eyes out of focus so that the bright spot appears to be fuzzy. A fuzzy circle. Now look very carefully at the design in the fuzzy circle and see if you can make it out. There is a definite pattern of blur, and you can have a wonderful time looking at that. Then go back, get your eyes into focus, and look at intense light. And you can go into it, and into it, and into it. Like you're falling down a funnel. And at the end of that funnel is this intense light. And go down, go in. It's the most thrilling experience. Then suddenly the guru wakes you up and says, what are you doing that for? Well, because I want realization. Why? Because we live in a world of, if we identify ourselves with the ego, we get into trouble, we suffer, we're in a mess. He says, are you afraid of that? Yes. So then, all that you're doing to practice yoga is based on fear. You're just escaping, you're running away. How do you think you can get realization through fear? Now there's one to think about. Krishnamurti says to people, now look, there is nothing you can do to be liberated, because all your efforts in the direction of liberation are phony. They are based on your desire to boost and continue your ego, and that will never lead to liberation. All you can do, he says, is to be aware of yourself as you are, without judgment. See what is. But then, if you can do that, you have no further problem. But if you try to do it, you're in the same mess all over again. Gurdjieff played the same game in a different way. He said, the most important thing is self-remembering. Always at every moment be aware of what you're doing. Watch yourself constantly and never be absent-minded. So all day, when you pick up the piece of paper, you realize, I'm picking up this piece of paper, and I'm opening it inside, and so on. And I know I'm doing it this way, so I'm not asleep. Ordinary people, pick up a piece of paper. In this way, we are really picking up the piece of paper. And so all these people are doing this, watching all the time. Now, where do they land up? I've told this story millions of times, really, excuse me, but it's very important. When they teach you in Japanese Zen how to use a sword, the first thing that the teacher says to the student is, now, if you're going to be a good soldier, you've got to be alert constantly, because you never know where the attack's going to come from. Now, you know what happens to you when you try to be on the alert. You think about being alert, and then you're a hopeless prey to the enemy, because you're not alert. You're thinking about being alert. You must be simply awake and relaxed. And then all your nerve ends are working, and wherever the attack comes from, you're ready. They liken this to a barrel of water. The water is just sitting there in the barrel. But the minute you make a hole in the barrel, the water immediately is ready to come out of that hole. So in the same way, the mind, when it is in the proper state, is ready to respond in any direction from which the attack may come. So this man is no longer alert in the sense of taut and anxious. Which way is it going to go? See? He's sitting there, like a cat sits there. And the minute anything happens, meow, it's right there. Because it didn't have to overcome any set in a direction opposite to that from which the attack comes. If you are set for the attack to come from there, and it comes from here, you have to pull back from there and go there, but that's too late. So you sit in the middle. And you don't expect the attack from any particular direction. Now, the most amazing gamesmanship goes on in the whole domain of yoga and spiritual practice. You would be astounded. So, I mean, one of the games in all this is to find a little flaw in you, see? Everybody has a place where they can be jiggled a bit. It's something they're a bit ashamed of, and so you think, does this person really know my secret? He's not saying anything because he's polite, but does he really see through me and know that somewhere are the awful awfuls and that I'm a little bit upsettable? This is all part of religious competition. If you go to the Roman Catholics and you've been psychoanalyzed, you see, they'll say, well, that's fine, but of course it's not nearly enough. I mean, that's all very well so far as it goes, but, or if you're a Roman Catholic and you go to a Buddhist outfit that's on a missionary basis, they'll say, yes, of course, through your Catholicism, you've learned some of the basic virtues, but of course, Catholicism doesn't go anywhere near the heart of things, in that it doesn't have an elaborate system of meditation like we have. Then you go over to the Hindu school, and they say, as the Buddhists go to a certain point, they do attain a very, very high stage of realization, but there is nevertheless something higher than that, which they don't quite get. And you will find this all round the world. Everybody claiming to have that little special extra essence which the others don't have. Now, why are they doing that? Are they all frauds? Are they all out to get you into their society? Sometimes, yes. But sometimes they're trying to see whether you fall for this, testing you out. This is upaya, skillful method. And if you become falling for that little extra special thing that's just supposed to be around the corner, then they've got you. Or rather, you've got yourself in the mix. And you have to work at that and work at that and work at that until you find out that you were being made a monkey of. But you were being made a monkey of because you could be made a monkey of. You hadn't really arrived where you are. You didn't have the nerve to be you. That is to say, to be the self. The medieval society in the West, comparable to Hindu society, allowed people to check out of the game. It revered and encouraged hermits, monks, nuns, of various types of discipline. There's this difference, you see, for the West and India. You couldn't join the Brahmana caste, the priest caste, from some other caste. But in the European caste system, by becoming a priest or a cleric of any kind, you see, a cleric means simply a literate person, you could familiarize with any other caste once you're in that one. And so it was a wonderful way of rising in society. You could, from being a serf, go to being a priest, to being an archbishop, and consort with the nobility. It was the only way open to cross castes, you see. And because they were the literate people, it was through literacy and through universities founded by clerics that our caste system began to break. And we got the idea of choosing your own vocation and not simply following what your parents did. Now, I want to make an observation here about checking out of the game. This is not encouraged in contemporary society. Because the Catholic Church and the Episcopalian Church are very powerful minorities, they can still support monasteries and even hermits. But you can't be one on your own without great difficulty. Firstly, because you're a poor consumer. See, around here, we have a number of hermits. There's a guy out there building that boat, and he's essentially a non-joiner, a poor consumer. And the community, they live a lot along here. And they're not working class people. They are people who dropped out of college because they thought it was stupid. And they're that sort of people. We would call them perhaps beatniks. But you see, the city doesn't like it because they aren't owning the right sort of cars, and therefore the local car sales.
Look, it's the two neo-Nazi lovers.
Hey, how did the date go? You didn't even make it to midnight.
A date? Oh, it was tomorrow, actually. Oh, I had one, I guess, tonight, but she didn't text me back.
Stuck with his dick in his hands.
That's right, I jerked off and I took a nap.
Ew.
Been there, done that.
That's what happens, Princessia. You go straight to sleep afterwards. It's like tryptophan. Thanksgiving in my hand.
I'd rather have Nora tire me out so that I have to go to take a nap.
Well, you can always dream of a Muslima. You can't take the neo-Nazi out of the Muslima, but you can take the Muslima out of the neo-Nazi. How is your Catholic conversion coming along, Princessia? When do you go before the Pontifex Maximus and dedicate your life to Jesus Christ?
Diego's leading me.
As he should. As Jesus leads him, he shall lead you to the resurrection.
To the resurrection?
Erection. What is the difference?
You'll accept Christ. Well,
What do you mean? I'm a baptized Christian.
but that doesn't mean you've accepted Christ.
Really?
You reject him all the time by the things that you say.
Really?
Yeah.
You guys talk bad about Jews all the time. He was Jewish, you know.
Oh, he's the first Christian.
No, he was only called a Christian by the Romans. What are you talking about? He was a Jew. He was called King of the Jews. That's what they put on his sign at his crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you two people are having such an active, lovely night. Wow. Princessia's been on here all day. What an exciting life you must be living, Princessia.
Thank you.
Why don't you do something with all those good looks and brains of yours? No?
Diego, what am I looking at in the picture? What am I looking at in the picture?
A woman?
An uncircumscribed penis, 2 inches long.
I don't know why girls pierce their nose down there, though.
Oh, I just saw this girl. I know she doesn't look like you, but she's dark. And...
Oh my god.
I don't know. She doesn't look like you.
I actually have
This is Could she be Middle Eastern?
What?
You see what I
Do you
mean?
know what her background is?
She's definitely not Latino.
She looks more Indian too.
Do you feel the rush? Alan wants. Full rush.
That's fine. The music too.
Alright, let me send you the video. Here you go.
What's that? Okay, let's see.
I know this.
Yeah, I know this. Yeah. This is a frequent thing I do want to talk about.
They don't have lawns, and so nobody can sell them lawnmowers.
It's fascinating.
They hardly use dishwashers, appliances of that kind. They don't need them. And also they wear blue jeans and